Good morning, everyone. This is your 15-minute warning. 5-minute warning.
All right, so when it's used been sent, let me know when everyone has it up.
We're almost ready to start.
Have it. My computer's just like, or Gmail, I guess, is just freezing right now. I'm reloading and that should work. And then we're good. Sorry, both our Gmails are literally frozen at like 99% loaded. This weekend's been a challenge for email. Fuck it. Is Chrome even working for you?
Is what working?
Chrome.
Define working.
Cal has returned to like 2013 and I have a flash drive.
Hey, Katie, we can
My
hear you,
email's
but
ready.
at least for me, your video is frozen.
That happens. It's just scanning for viruses right now, and then I'll download it. I have a flash drive. I'll get it to Julian that way. This is really a throwback and is hilarious for virtual debate. Okay, virus scanners are unavailable. I hope this won't kill my computer. Okay, it's opening on my computer. I'm flashing it to Julian. What is he around for? Okay. I have it up. We're good.
All right, everyone good to go? Awesome. The United States federal government should exclude armed attacks in nearly all of the South China Sea from the U.S. Philippines Mutual Defense Treaty. Condition 1 is a commitment. Chinese tests of U.S. commitments to defend the Philippines. Exclusive economic zone are ongoing. The entrapment process has already begun. Rebels 324 Beijing be testing Washington Ben's allies from 2. Middles easy on Sunday of 220 Chinese vessels anchored with right now post polling due. HR bitching back local land of Congress hearing Foreign Secretary looks into the Philippines fighting folks to defense treaty looks and bidding Beijing to make a move that would make it impossible. But invoke the treaty which China would want to test U.S. sincerity broke accommodation will only serve selfish interest not by the regional peace. The U.S. will lose the imminent battle. China most favorable geography, asymmetric interests, and tactical supremacy. O'Connor and Jamal 3-4 the Eastern China are conducting carefully heavily test one more move for the lead all I call the use lose the goal senior for they will call so no combination of the shelter the situation start China's adequate forces they are electronic stock ups naval and nuclear to prevail he should be China's ever hand favors geography greater will and willingness to strike first China's already exceeded the U.S. in the shipbuilding and ballistic missiles and air defense these categories for decisive and hypothetical flight over the ESDS James E. Fennell director of intelligence the PLA rocket force put U.S. carriers at risk of the fielding DF-21 DF-26 anti-carrier missiles China's use of maritime hybrid warfare near distributed islands of the SCS push the batteries to sea control the aggressive strategy to swarm waters overwhelm Navy warship sensors to the rest of perimeters reassuring commitments backfires by irking national sentiment Teglo 325 China admits the sign of a campaign to rouse Chinese nationals by the height of the carbon. Chinese social media responded to demand to the PLA to invade the Philippines. The U.S. cheered on the Philippines and fighting with China. Chinese nationals linked to China's centrifugation when Western powers claimed what Chinese territory the U.S. was using the Philippines as a proxy to grab Chinese territory. She would have been happy with the Philippines. China racist party prestige upholding the country's nationalism. Nationalism creates audience costs to prevent China from backing down. Wing 19, the Chinese executive vice foreign minister gave its presentation on China's SCS highlighting as a national priority. If economically see the SCS will not a core interest. This might raise the higher national stating the SCS a part of foreign interest. Single China clearly has preeminence of some blocks and defense that with the instrument allowed use. China's assertion reported through status for innocent security imperatives asserting claim that the SDS of the first in China's status imitating status acts. Previous studies repeat Eurocentric biases that overlook the importance of humiliation and risk assessment. Orphan 20, the pronoun view, treats fears, aberrations, rational behavior. Few studies analyze emotions and each specific affairs in rational hierarchy. It's underappreciated as irrelevant whether emotion are part of results of propaganda. Studies display great difficulties explaining miscalculations, including refuse to use hotlines. Studies made the strong case for the central humiliation framing Beijing's responses of the SDS foreign ministry. Assert China's sovereignty and dignity should not be violated. The U.S. cannot defeat China in an arms race. Scaling back commitment to the Philippines reverses the security dilemma. Goldstein in 20. Washington does not have resources to sink the Philippines. Beijing will respond to the U.S. forced by targeting violence of more firepower. China can match the U.S. at lower costs. Does China pose any credible threat? There is no reason in China's plotting invasion of Luzon before use in Beijing. Use force against its neighbors. Will China cut off countries' access to sea lane? Extreme alliances. China's self-be vulnerable actions to strengthen the alliance. Trigger security dilemma. China's rapid naval buildup followed Obama's pivot to Asia. Washington might lead the bare runs of the alliance to turn against the very possibility of a blatant Chinese aggression. Mutual defense treaty application. The SDS also causes Filipino aggression against China. Rue Ellison and Golden 20 maritime disputes such as China, the South China Sea, defense alliances provide agree challenger states with the opportunity to provoke defending states and defensive alliance rights challenger the states with security umbrellas to engage in propagations. Defense is the highest level obligation. Membership security institutions can facilitate low level propagations, which we proxy with MIDs based on ICAO. Maritime claims are considered to have a high potential salient to the resources that are found beneath maritime zones. The defensive alliances are institutional opportunity mechanisms. They enable maritime propagations. This provides a great and full relief for states by providing them with minimum guarantees. Defensive alliances represent the highest and strongest military commitment. Institutional strength ultimately becomes more important. Filipino aggression independently escalates. Etione 17. The treaties in Southeast Asia have given several states a finger on the trigger. The NDT between the U.S. and the Philippines is particularly troubling. Cannot lead not only to war, but also drive both superpowers into confrontation. The conflict between China and the Philippines are warring. Entrapment is a process, not an event. Miscalculation occurs in escalatory steps. Edelson terms in 18. We also think of entrapment as an either or. Beckley says a theoretical problem like Kybars is not the way they refer to non-international events that lead to conflict or really discrete or occur in escalatory steps. Allied states and Navy should be opposed, consider diversion purposes of the nature of that opposition, allied for across timing goals and sides of contribution, create pressure conditions for allies to entrap one another. War goes nuclear, use to lose pressures, creates cause Chinese first strike. Logan 918, China's new expansion needs technical and traits to shift to an alert posture. Experts warn that the entanglement of Chinese conventional nuclear forces introduce escalation risk to DF-21 and DF-26 shift. The switch between conventional nuclear payload. This make overlap and make it difficult for the U.S. to determine which systems are nuclear. Strikes against conventional capabilities might inadvertently Beijing's nuclear deterrent efforts to locate and track could be misinterpreted. Preparations for a first strike mismatch could exacerbate escalation dynamics with the U.S. falsely believing that China is prepared for entanglement. Chinese believe the U.S. actions part of a campaign to erode China's nuclear deterrent. This entanglement increased pressures to use of nuclear weapons to pacify nuclear forces lead to misjudge action. China's military decks describe potentially escalatory signaling for demonstrating resolving launching ICBM. China's NFU can change. Even in conventional war, destabilizes the world. Comfort. Savalas and Dareful 16. Russia could be exploit U.S. occupation as increased threats to the Eastern European caucus and Baltic neighbors. NATO might pledge support for the U.S. effort oppose Chinese aggression. North Korea is even more unpredictable than Russia used missiles against Japan. A conflict could assert the Middle East fighting opening for violence from extremist groups. So Middle East typical displays additional demands. Contention 2 is Biden. Biden overcommits to alliances now, creates the socio-political basis for U.S.-China conflict. Then in 311, Biden may be fusing a fatal alliance dilemma, cultivating allies, prevents pitfalls. Biden wants to break from Trump, attempting to cooperate with allies. China-U.S. relations are an inflection point. China is not the past Soviet Union. The foremost problem facing the U.S. is not China, but to overcome its own overexpansion. The China is the solution. The choice of forsake personal bias. We'll have to see whether Biden rebuild the political and social basis of China-U.S. relations. The plan's unconditional, clear presidential signal socializes goodwill between the U.S. and China. Pi and 2-2. China simulations found to an official strategies to cooperate and then play for tit for tat. A country will gain and offers goodwill gesture and then response in kind. This insight is especially applicable to U.S.-China. The first to extend an olive branch. If neither Biden wants a recipe CDU, relations are likely to worsen. The countries are preparing for a phase-off green dangerous dynamic. The only way to prevent deterioration is for Biden to take the first country steps and wins to cooperate. Continuations of brash American resolve risk sleepwalking into conflict. Wars begin by accident, not choice. 9-3-11. China's fight. Foreign Minister called to reset bilateral relations. Biden is not reversing Trump's policy. Analysts believe the U.S.-China relations entering conflict. I'm not that pessimistic. Economic interdependence reduces the probability of both countries having intent to cooperate. Miscalculation is always possible. History of cases of misperception will American leads permit a constructive relationship where they succumb to fear. The stages attributed the war to fear. The U.S. must avoid exaggerated fears. Accidents are likely now because of the Chinese Coast Guard law. Psychological trust is key. Pitlow 3-3. Noise generated by the new Chinese Coast Guard law arises from its application to the NSCS, which through the IR of the Philippines. It generates anxiety, while White Holes may signal the intent to demilitarize interaction in a kind of caution may expose them to risks should the Coast Guard act rapidly. It may raise the specter of accidents to be combated by dreadnoughts and national pressures that forces the standard. And restricted application may fuel tensions to undercut confidence building. Accidents go nuclear. Competent all 16. War can be not likely from resulting from premeditated attack. Crisis could involve miscalculation. China could intimidate sabers below threshold intervention. Misjudged where that is the Americans have seen combatants through the water. China's claimed the Chinese law force in these waters for start causing conflict to be heightened. Conditions recall Europe 1914 when economies were interlocked to give the first move advantage of perception of probability of hostilities to increase pressure on each side. A trigger is not used for wholesomely dangerous instead of strike first, and they believe that fighting would end quickly. Rational actor models underestimate the risk of miscalculation. States are not accountants. Gods have 17 deterrents are a rational actor to use to start to use the woman would be so risky that nobody regardless of cultural attribution would ever conclude they could prevail. Politicians had a palpable fear showing anything that can be understood as weakness. So research of organizational sociology conclude different governments behave following sociological laws. So observation challenge the assumption that safe behavior rational actors and it should be paid to psychologists including fear, misperception, critical global events, by account to honor critique keywords for emotion, not factor in equations, external stage cost benefit, and also not point to a particular policy choice that leadership might be able to embrace the cognitive limitations of different tolerance for risk leading miscalculation, psychological symbolic forces, and pattern choices for evaluating cooperation is key to strengthen moderate. China is not a monolith. Free all 19. We do not believe Beijing is a threat nor China monolith. Reviews leaders and so rapid growth as Beijing towards a more sort of role may change. Officials note that moderate cooperative approach for Chinese interests. Washington adversarial stance weakens those voices for international cooperation through leadership want China to play a constructive role. U.S. opposition will prevent an increase in China's role. The U.S. cannot slow China's rise of damaging itself. The U.S. presses the treat China as an enemy will weaken relations to those allies. The U.S. is a revisionist power. China's territorial ambitions are known, limited, and do not cause war. King and 20 states goals are unknowable. Abstract IR assumes all states will influence approach each other in a fog of uncertainty. These are simply assumptions, not empirical state theories based on fears of Asian instability caused by China, but a closer look leads to different conclusions. China is not a cipher upon which we speculate. China's clear and consistent priorities. Taiwan, the SCS, and India. China resolves maybe 2,000 kilometers. China's not care about invading conquer. This is clear empirically. We ignore what is right in front of us. China's unlikely to start a war. The U.S. is the revisionist power, not China and North Korea. Is the U.S. is trying to implement a regime change where the U.S. wants China to intervene. We want China to interfere when we want them. China some issues, cares about some issues, not care about. 1950 Korea could have been incorporated in China proper. Korea is not clearly not Chinese. Chinese military forces were drawn back into China. Hegemony makes miscalculation more likely. Transition wars are unlikely because parity is a destination, not a midway point. Making 19 supremacy is based on a faulty theory of IR and could be bare conditions in which hegemonic wars likely strategies should restore parity, equilibrium, and stability. The solution was supreme power parity. American census requires unlimiting the lessons of the First World War. The danger for escalation is the cost we paid to war and supremacy staying in the region. Comes to a very serious first major power. War is taking can get out of hand and a war can materialize. Political weapons leaders or not. A calculating leaders act intuitively, emotionally, prefer cash off defeat, accumulation, obsessive precision, status. PTT is flawed both consumption, historically, approximate community destination, as well as the waypoint. Hegemonic war only support the theory in the vague manners. Athens and action purists and far from modern 1914 Russia. The rising and far from clear hegemonic actually means anything in the 19th century. So, this example, parity versus hegemony can no longer be serious. This system balance was intentionally constructed upon a territorial settlement. The LAO is resilient, and the U.S. is less liberal than China. McKinney and Butts 19. The U.S. created an order that for keeping peace for 80 years, new peace. There's no business. This is what U.S. actions or the order contributes to the decline of war. Explanation trust global territorial norms, globalized market settlement, territorial disputes, declining utility explanations like the multivariate. The only ad suggests that you are unrelated. Claiming a peace is dependent on abstract order maintained by America. They need to provide serious head of China. A Islamic slicing great non-challenge exists in order and unsurpassed America's own contemporary record when the U.S. was rising. They colonized seized the maritime choke points and challenged the old world. The U.S. launched disastrous invasion, torture, genocide. The point the wars more resilient than first realized. 19th century new peace was discipline of wars, thefts, and assertions of SAS. Power combination. The one thing that is fatal. She's been heralded as the most prominent champion international or globalization. Abe Cobb to copy best practice. Empirical and theoretical research confirms China seeks status recognition. Larson and Shebeko 19. China's militarized the SES to assert their status. Accommodation China behavior in a constructive direction to obstruct the rise of China. Pro nationals build up to rivalry status groups, motivate lower status groups to challenge the status quo. The status hierarchy can turbocharge competition. Lower status groups will lash out. SAT empirical research just efforts to frustrate status of China result in a backlash. U.S. should reinforce efforts to achieve status instead of containment cooperation.
Good for cross-sex.
Give me 1 second to get some water. Okay, I'm good.
Cool. What attacks in the SCS can activate the defense pact after the F?
After the AF, we would exclude most of the Philippines' exclusive economic zone in the South China Sea. The plan may not include the territorial waters surrounding the Philippines mainland, as well as the contiguous zone of the EEZ.
Okay, so pretty much gets rid of the EEZ, keeps Philippine Islands and direct territorial waters, correct?
It keeps the
anything.
It keeps like the defense around the Philippine mainland, and it keeps the 12 miles directly of territorial waters around the Philippines, but it does not contain. It does not accommodate the Philippines' claims to the rest of the SES.
Yeah. Your arms buildup internal link. Let's talk about the it's the Goldstein card actually. The Goldstein card says, quote, arms buildup followed Obama's pivot to Asia. Obama's pivot to Asia included things like Japanese military buildup, massive new investment in Guam military capabilities, aircraft carrier transits. Why is the Philippines, who's a backwater country without a U.S. military base, perceived as the largest threat to China to an extent that it causes an arms buildup?
Well, a couple of things. One, we don't need to win that the plan reverses the entire Asia pivot immediately, but rather that it signals a presidential good faith between the U.S. and China that sets the stage for further cooperation.
So,
second, we have read evidence about the importance of the South China Sea to Chinese thinkers, that they believe it's a core nationalist imperative, that they believe it's part of their historical territory.
Let's start by talking about this good faith initiative. Last week, Blinken met with Chinese diplomats in Alaska. The meeting ended with both sides pretty much blowing up at each other, and the U.S. just placed new sanctions on China in concert with the European Union, Japan, and a host of our other allies for human rights abuses against the Uyghurs. Why?
Yeah, because the U.S. isn't conceding
why is the app a
anything.
sufficient sign of presidential good faith?
Because right now the United States is taking a hardline stance on China. There's no concession on the part of the president.
No, I agree. Like, we do have a hardline stance right now. That's something that we will all agree on. My question is, you have evidence that says the app is necessary to reassure China, but what evidence says it's sufficient given Biden's hard stance foreign policy moves in other areas, i.e. the new sanctions.
Our pay evidence indicates that new signals of cooperation in the Biden administration are critical for a reciprocal cycle of
your
goodwill
pay
between the US
evidence
and
from
China.
2-2,
Or Zen
which
evidence
is,
about
you know,
contextualizes that
2
to
months
alliance
old.
policy.
The Zen
Sorry?
evidence, again, doesn't assume new sanctions. So no card assumes new sanctions. Great.
I don't really
Let's talk
see
about
the importance
second
of
thing.
sanctions in the context of
It
military
is
policy
if you're
between the
talking
United
about
States and
Chinese
China
status and
and
military
reversing the
policy.
status of containment.
Sanctions are literally containment, Tyler.
But
Let's talk
not
though about the
containment in the
second part
military
about the
sense, in that we are denying Chinese application of their historical claims to regions like the
okay.
South
Well
China
then,
Sea.
Japan.
You have not
well
yet
then,
read a
Japan,
card
the
about
Secaucus
sanctions
is
at
a
all.
massive alt cause, and Euraf does not solve.
Okay. 6, advantage 1, advantage 2. Sent. All right. I just get like thumbs up for everyone when they got it. Good. Dartmouth. Cool. First off, as a result of this, the plan factor was resolving client as the Chinese nuclear war over Taiwan, 1918, the conscious family, US Taiwan has 5 years of maneuvering crisis over Taiwan by trigger on topic as the president has questioned the US commitment to collective defense should the US withdraw from any bilateral security agreement Beijing making with the US commitment are no longer credible conclusion might motivate the US to force itself if it collapse the US critically completed major mass escalation and Sino American conflict and conflict may escalate both sides would have to meet the conflict by extending horizontally and vertically both sides it's clear important nuclear weapons. Philippines NDT is the linchpin of all parts 1 and 16 actions that affect Philippines constitute a particular problem for the US ironclad community. Admin fails to respond decisively would prove that might it does make right in the US is giving credit to China's officials ruling about nothing more than a piece of paper for in China and the US and elsewhere which compete in how Beijing deals with next happen even if it doesn't escalate, it collapses the global economy and control cements semiconductor dominance which solves all impacts. Risco 312 unipolar world is more being competition. Noble Taiwan is quickly becoming the most most watched nation on the Taiwan dominates the global chip manufacturing advantage should only increase your control. Taiwan can effectively influence the world's global supply. It's not hyperbole. The market is dangerously concentrated in Taiwan because China converts a reunification any instant chip production with itself to pass off the global economy rational actors can supplement the misconduct China wants its slaves that are otherwise its global war has to even taken order will fall on the US and the US will overrate the most powerful country the Iran ISIS and China works to accuracy we contended with foreign policy begins to come the world cannot come with the working absent the US national security requires an resource the US is doing economically more research to go to abroad most basic will be econ growth. Substantial topicality is next. A substantial limit was to remove all activity that alternate means for activation. The app is instead a restriction to FOP 5 we turn to whether no security regulations socialization it does not the act prohibits calls to act is not foreclosed all means of charitable socialization charities being launched campaigns to reveal or personnel of the act solicitation leaves open alternate channels accordingly the act is not substantially solicitation violation the act is not foreclosed alternate means for activation TCL 6 act not substantially but solicitation but prohibited calls to residents who have not chosen to receive calls from solicitor the act is not foreclosed all means solicitation of volunteers could solicit from all residents and professionals solicit from residents who have not entered with a do not call let's vote negative for limits and ground allowing its substantial modifications to defense back conditions allows thousands of small acts based on individual on steps of attack and conditions many which don't link to coordinate arguments or also the status quo enough to trigger links reasonably is arbitrary encourages gender intervention and creates a moral hazard for being as untopical as possible so being technically reasonable. Next off the states counterplan the 50 states should refuse to deploy the state national guard and reserve to defend nearly all of the South China Sea under the US Philippines Future Defense Treaty withholding deployment solves per block state decision causing endless war deconflicting the most dangerous opponent where we are Americans the presidency the states law the last and most important prerogative desire for themselves to recapture states right to determine when conditions exist for president to call upon the guard governor withhold the use of the national guard letter addition to the anti-war wars if it states the guard home if that fight to save your country. Next off the politics is that President Biden should enter into prior bonding consultation with Senator Menendez over the plan's unilateral foreign policy change infuriates Menendez. He's accommodated now but he backlashes at the plan by killing Biden nominees. Lincoln alone turns case 2C32 if Biden thinks he can make foreign policy without consulting Menendez. He's got nothing coming Menendez to Obama treaty policy this whole discussion at the White House as a result he made things more difficult. These hopeful things are changing but he can get Congress on line. There's a campaign to create people with Menendez who has been afraid to break him Menendez and Lupo critical Biden's working closely coordinated and seek him attack these are working to keep Menendez happy. Biden will cross his own imperial Menendez suspension for working Republicans to be asked every vote counts even if Biden keep Menendez loop he may disagree but now present obstacles if they keep it informed of the service about enemies. Colin Cow can be confirmed but the combo of unity Biden PC and Menendez are key gold 317 call remains salty can face a gauntlet of who is a panel forging is your test call and Biden's cloud Biden Republicans stood behind him. Dems can confirm that Republican votes, but they have to unify the call, makes it a committee button. We're still obstacle calls up to Biden. It's all doable, and it's will be one to watch. Hasn't taken a position. Call is key to U.S. Middle Eastern policy. Index 319. Eminent call is eminently qualified for this critically important role. He never would have been a nuclear round at college spearhead. That was a counterbalance call worked and his record posture to terror and new shirt control that was voting. The Black Africa's call has full confidence to commit to voting against nuclear ambition, aggression, proliferation, and rights violations. Extinction. W&D strong 11 MDs for involved WD quickly with followed. Iran is prepared to launch advance battle war for the U.S. DNA recombination or defense of the result would cause a Chinese version response that would begin World War III would be Armageddon. Next off, the IFIA counterpart, the Republic of the Philippines should exclude armed attacks in nearly all the South China Sea from the U.S. Philippines Mutual Defense Treaty. Next off is the Hotlines counterpart, the United States federal government should essentially increase direct military to military communications and regular formal dialogue on strategic stability issues in the South China Sea, with the People's Republic of China offered to begin negotiations on lifting tariffs on the People's Republic of China, commit to negotiating and abiding by a code of conduct in the South China Sea, and increase cooperation in disease tracking and vaccine development with the People's Republic of China. Hotline to dialogue solve the H19 to maintain stability. There are compliance between military leaderships or clients in neutralizing since the warning escalation communication deal was between the U.S. Armed Forces and police services over purpose of communication between U.S. and China service playing an important role. Direct contacts are critically important to means of de-escalation in a situation U.S. Chinese has the defense to engage in real dialogue and stability issues dialogue allows parties to understand each other's strategic launch military doctrines and rationale behind programs on control trees and not requirement for strategic stability. Advantage 1. This is the conclusion of their 1AC article. The U.S. already recommitted, which should have caused the war. 1AC Rebels 324. The U.S. since with the Philippines regarding concern the Chinese vessel Western review for China would want to test the U.S. in helping allies during conflicts of recent dialogue. Lead Beijing to believe the U.S. has no clear policy on China using gap that advances maritime interests and increased dominance. NCA's commitments are the backbone of American credibility, the entire region declining. That's why causes trade collapse, common interrupt regional war, and allied defection. Mastro 20. The U.S. has an interest, incredibly reliable part of the U.S. should protect its allies and the U.S. is critical for security and prosperity. The Japan agree rely on the U.S. security country to feature the military presence and protect trade, deter the aggression, maintain speech, concealing China would not only security risks, but the presence inspire security control world of clash could escalate involving the U.S. and China's control exclusions that would disrupt lines of communication and supply chains, preventing EPO and Arkansas to the Pacific power critically as a security partner country to the region. The yes is often dominant dynamic favor of the U.S. but signaling complacency and boldness China. Source 20. The China's opposite strategic liability to defend the U.S. grid. China's forces security environment for military defense have the advantage for allies intermediate range missile provide Washington with options to deter escalation. Deterrence is strong now. The SAS and recent naval exercises prove it won't embolden China. Herzinger 20. The U.S. generated this way joint fighting capability. The U.S. demonstrated intent to confront China's revisions behavior to critical time coordinate public affairs campaign. How the unique U.S. ability to leverage domestic and foreign bases. Blinken committed to defend the Philippines in the U.S., but there's lingering uncertainty. Only risk the Afghan mindset. Wu 128 plunge right back into the Philippines economic uncertainties behind the delays. Pledge a new U.S. administration opportunity to re-engage in dialogue how to reinvigorate the alliance. Focus will be on securing the pledge of verbal commitment also been made by Pompeo. Even if it trust been true, it won't escalate now. 19. Both parties have an incentive to avoid finding a new global impact of nuclear power should be zero and assuming commitments are credible to client states. Expectation of power will be augmented and makes more likely to defend the scope of its risk of moral hazard or when bargaining act ensure war nuclear umbrellas increases the global scale client state will initiate MID. However, this effect is driven entirely by one side use of force that never escalates nuclear umbrellas positively associated with likely the crisis will include a peaceful settlement. They announced it but are totally committed to defending the U.S. against China, but they don't fear entrapment. ASLA 20. Philippines has decided alliance with the U.S. The country sends the only treaty allies from the Philippines. She cannot afford to lose the Philippines against China. Philippines it's like the side with Washington any potential conflict of major ring isn't as a defense treaty. The two sides are according to the senior military official we can remain neutral but if China attacks we are obliged to help the U.S. plans. These are secret. The whole point is they're afraid of China and doubt the American commitment. The F is wrong about Manola's incentives. Hurry again 20. The internal pressure essential to decide to restore the VFA. The Kurdish top already explained the reversal decision as a response to the changing circumstances of the time pandemic super attention. We look forward to our strong military partnership with our regional allies building common defense towards stability, peace, and economic progress and prosperity. Religious was one to China's intrusion and aggressive action against climate islands and the SCS played a crucial role. Even if two territories are all right. No arms racing or posture changes. Kulaki 20 has 100. The U.S. and Russia have several thousand. Their questionable reason reports for China may be able to cycle even China would still be 5-6 times smaller. Why China's are so small that support we're attacking for allowing this league headline China's Eurozone. Believe they can be used strategic treated like gospel. China will never use nuclear weapons, personal weapons, or like a paper tiger. Modestly, one against this understandable. There's nothing aggressive for long. It does not pretend to change in Chinese nuclear thinking. The U.S. move forward modernizing China's unlikely to military expenditure stable 2%. All right, advantage 2. There's massive all causes to China's status seeking U.S. terrorist authoritarianism, flagrant human rights abuses, cold dependency. There's no odds, which means they'll never be able to match the U.S. and Western alliances. The AF isn't sufficient to restore Japan and South Korea. Alliance still encircle China. Co-op with China's over ASEAN 20 Corona crisis will put Washington away from the Black Nation. Washington will even political co-op or over alliance China now. But a big clear national interest on the demand is in Corona crisis exacerbation is already apparent. China's leadership is shot because of COVID. ASEAN 20 CCP. The CCP order cover up primitive silencing social media and destroying laboratory samples. The party like organized worldwide propaganda campaign poison relation with new dynamic will be deep sea distress in Europe and Asia returning equipment and just hedges disabled North 18 criticism mischaracterized America's dilemma. These hegemon for the makes of public and private goods rerun as possible so the hegemon can use simultaneous control negative externalities. Policy the US as a capable of reversing the climate using different levels of power. Many rest of a decline in this and because the United States has no computer competitor militarily or economically. The US is the most formidable military power. Though broad-based metrics demonstrate the United States remains leading to the counterfactual saying where the United States and operating national security will be a fragile one. No China's launch a war in Kalaki 18 China is not prepared to find nuclear where the US China's nuclear start its own thing as likely as long as China remains able to retaliate. The US structures a hyper which why China's also remains small and often U.S. participants refuse to assure Chinese counterparts of U.S. force is off the table. At best, the change would take years. Kulaki 15 China's move to launch warnings unlikely because it requires significant technical upgrades that China cannot put in place anytime in the near future. No miscalc brands 20 that war won't start by accident. The thesis accidental conclusion yes, it's good. We declare this hard to identify any war that came out, even though no one wanted. Germany insisted on aggressive policies. Egyptian leaders were highly bound to the danger countries want to avoid where accidental war seems unlikely. Both sides seek to avoid when they will find a way. Complicate her where one decides the war is preferable. This could happen all too easy. Beijing will make it deliberate choice of making also power with the perception used could make it less like a chance. You can imagine war that involves capability to strengthen the U.S. unless those seem bound to the Americans shouldn't fool themselves into thinking mitigate misperception offer a cheaper way. Please, you want me to just go back to page one, like read cards?
Actually, read this.
Okay. Solitary advantage.
Yep.
All right. Relation. Oh my God. Relations are low now. Mitchell 320. We can expose to be concerned about China's behavior towards Hong Kong and Taiwan, Yang Lab in the U.S. Bar exchange was extraordinary. The tensions is highly fundamental about China's resisting the rules-based order of Beijing. We're not compromised after use of time relations between points. The overall turn around skill of the Biden administration and no interest in pushing the reset button. Relation war like if the Biden is elevated. This will say our religion in the is not going to happen. Cool. So what happened there? We have an external monitor and I accidentally just knocked it over. That's why I yelled, "Oh my God!" So I'm just gonna pick that back up. Sorry about that, everybody. I'm ready for conflicts.
No worries. You good?
Yeah.
Okay. Status of the counterplans.
Initial wing kick flanks.
Okay. The
And
state's
too.
State's counterplan. The text only restricts deployment of the state National Guard. What does that do about the federal military?
Sorry, I missed the last part of that question.
What does that do
About
about
the
the
what
federal
military?
military?
The federal military isn't necessary. I wouldn't see evidence that it says
But
that
the federal
National Guard
military
the
isn't
primary.
necessary to respond to
Right.
an invasion of the
Yeah, I
South
want to
China
see evidence
Sea.
actually. Yeah, I want to see evidence actually says that the primary sort of military vehicle or instrument that is used to respond to alliance commitments is in
So we
fact
believe the
National
10th
Guard.
Amendment Center about the primary military vehicle that the United States is going to use to
It is
respond
the
to the
National
South
Guard.
China Sea.
You
is
can
the
pontificate all you
states.
want, but we have read a fantastic 1 and C card.
Sure. Okay.
Yes.
The hotline counterplan. What does a hotline do to de-escalate miscalculation between?
Well, it's not simply a hotline. We increase or we sort of establish regular dialogue between top military officials, which
Okay, so
enhances
dialogue
the
between top military officials and a
That's
hotline.
part of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
There are 200 Chinese ships currently parked in the South China Sea. Is your argument Xi's going to pick up the phone and be like, "Hey, we promise we don't intend these ships to be aggressive"?
Well, it resolves miscalc. It helps the
How?
U.S. and China understand why they're doing the things they're doing, which resolves
Why?
the unintentional
Okay.
escalation that
So
your scenario is
like a
about.
ship or a helicopter goes down in the South China Sea. Why would they believe
Right,
anything the other
the
side
two countries
says
can then-
when they've
The U.S.
just
and China can then
basically been
talk
through
to
the
each
brink
other
of
to
war?
sort of understand the roots of that conflict, understand there wasn't an intentional action, and they
Why
can
would they
limit
believe
escalation.
anything the other side says?
Why wouldn't they?
Because
Well,
they
actually,
just got attacked.
actually, a big part of
They
that,
are in
a reason.
about to start
So
a
this
war.
is actually an important distinction. We establish regular military to military dialogue, which means trust gets built over time. So they have an
What does that
incentive
do
to
about
trust what
the
the other
immediate
says.
impending conflict?
Well, they have an incentive to trust what the other side says
Okay.
because there have been regular dialogue in the past.
Resolve DA, your link evidence is
Yeah.
about withdrawal from NATO. We did not have a
No, it's
commitment to defend the South. Yeah, it is. We did not have
That's
a commitment to defend the South China Sea.
That's like the uniqueness Taiwan impact card. The next link is about
Yeah, okay.
or
The
like
card that
the
actually
Parswamming
connects
card,
it to the impact is about withdrawal from a bilateral security agreement. Why is
No,
the
no,
plan
that-
perceived as withdrawal
the
from a
card-
bilateral security agreement?
That's not the link card. That card says that if China doubts sort of U.S. resolve in the South China Sea, they will start a war by Taiwan. Our link card is the next card, the Parswamming card.
Okay, so again, why is
Yes.
the plan was received as abrogation or withdrawal from the MDT
Because
when
it
it reverses
backs
a
down on
commitment
the-
we
well,
adopted
it's not-
2 years
Our,
ago?
our link card doesn't say you have to withdraw from the MDT to undermine American resolve.
Should
It
the
simply
United
says
States
that you
withdraw from any bilateral security agreement? Beijing
that's you're literally looking at the wrong link card. Like everyone should just go to the next card in the 1 and C.
Yeah, but
You'll
none,
see.
this card doesn't
there's a
talk
link
about
that says
Taiwan or okay.
it says that it undermines American resolve though. So that's the
I
link.
have one more.
The
I
other
have one
card's
more
internally.
question. The call DA. What evidence
Yeah.
do you have that Menendez says yes to the counterplan?
Well, he would if we consult with him.
Why?
The first 1 and C card says that during the Obama administration, when Obama sort of consulted with Menendez prior to making a major foreign policy decision.
So if we just
Menendez
talk, he
was
just agrees to
significantly
anything
more
the
likely.
president says.
Yeah, he wants to feel like we're listening to him and think he's important.
Stop prep. Sending it out. The order is advantage 1, the Biden advantage, topic.
Rom, I don't know if any of the judges are back, so.
Yeah, fair enough. Oh, everybody's back. Okay. The order is advantage 1, advantage 2, T, the Philippine kick-out counterplan, the states counterplan, the hotlines counterplan, the resolve DA, and then the Menendez consult politics call DA. Let me close the doc real quick.
Rom, can you give the off-case order again?
Yeah, topicality, Philippines counterplan or kick-out counterplan, Ethernet cable, states counterplan, hotlines counterplan, resolve DA, consult / politics DA. And let me just quickly close one document so I can see this as a catastrophe waiting to happen. Just had my external monitor die. I need a quick second.
Not a good 10 minutes for external monitors.
Yeah, I have been having some issues with
I had to disconnect my external monitor for this tournament because it wasn't working at all.
I think
This is our first time doing it and we've knocked it over twice. So hopefully we stay at the 1 a day limit.
Okay, yeah, I need to disconnect it for the speech, unfortunately. Ready. I see this is where we are in. Okay. I think I'm good. Is everybody good? All right. Group of the deterrence arguments at the top. 1, deterrence low now. U.S. assets are ill-suited for the region. China's geographic advantages of Connor, Goldstein, McKinney, and Butts 19. The geographic strength of these DCs do not have dominant features that strong and equal alphas, defensive strategies, have a decisive advantage. The directors joint chiefs outside the outlets, substantial transform, anti-ship, anti-air launches, the network, the good to shut the entire SES down. 2, interstate symmetry. The SES are worthless rock. China doesn't think we defend them. 3, audience cause China will back down more pretty under 20 Chinese and believes it must fall through because it does not want to be perceived as the domestic audience back then. Giving it to the Philippines would be loss of faith. The SES become core interest for China to be political cost for the Chinese government to back away for second island chain checks. Bello 19 backing in the U.S. and the forces of the SES are massive forces on the second island chain and the third island chain. The Indo-Pac is awesome. Strike capability 5 carrier strike capability 1100 aircraft, the force size right on its doorstep. The China was successful in nullifying U.S. powers and the SES with capacity to strike within minutes would remain formidable. 5 turn hegemony bad causes extinction. King 20 the China is not a rising European state competing with the power of the multiple system in China. The ancient country with the enduring civilizational influence the Chinese power and the Chinese ideas of fact of life and the power transition were never obtained. The virtually no other country in the past 1,000 years. Find out look at the far more enduring exchange. Chinese and Japanese were close to 3 out of 20 dynastic transitions over the 19th century. The campus of all the world countries spent centuries living together with each other, really fighting against massive and country with returning power and stability. History is not for the past continues the days of as created and sustained collective identities. Members of the international orders are not created in a late canvases directly restricting what's changed. China the day like the day would be more useful for taking China's behavior. There's no reason to believe China will behave like European rising power with the fighting transition war claim. Hegemony China cannot be completely westernized and Westphalian. It also poses a fundamental challenge that Westphalian order is not clear that power transition theory can be applied uncritically. 6, no, China won't shut off shipping in bikini. 19, the principal objective debating American strategy that China is replicating the quest for the trouble is whether retreats revisions of passive or disagreement exactly continues to battle opponents by the United States and modifying the existing order for the which access the vast majority of Chinese specially agree that China ambition territorial ambition is limited derived from historical and agree the commerce travel through the South China Sea. It's coming to or from China. The most of the commerce not being routed through China's coast. So I get that even if China did interfere with commerce, it would be principally its own commerce. 7, they've conceded Chinese strategic submarines outside of the first island chain solve extinction, and that China's a status-seeking power, which means that the plan's accommodation prevents the revisionist behavior. The blanket argument is answered on the resolve the, as well as all the arguments I made above. All can be cross-applied to the resolve the entrapment defense assumes entrapment is an event, not a process. It's also not about the Philippines, which only we have evidence about. Their next card is about the U.S. entrapping the Philippines, not vice versa, and it establishes that the kick-out counterplan links more to all the net benefits. The Philippines is afraid of China, which is why they're exploiting the American security guarantee, because they have dropped our moral hazard evidence. That is also a deficit to the state's counterplan because they don't have the federal security guarantee. The arms racing defense says it's not offensive, which proves that China is not a revisionist power. Kulaki is clearly supporting engagement. It is also, but it does say that it does cause instability by raising the risk of miscalculated accidents, which supports our NIE evidence on the second advantage. There are now all causes our uniqueness for the AFWA, and we don't need to spill over to overwhelm them anyways, because our evidence is specific to the South China Sea. The COVID takes out the economy DA, but does say that the economy, our 1AC evidence says the economy is China is recovering faster from COVID. We also have evidence from this month that assumes COVID, the hedge sustainable evidence. It takes out resolve as well because it says hegemony we will always remain resolved. However, it is only about free riding, which are Kang evidence indicts because it assumes the incentives are backwards. Instead, states engage in moral hazard. The launch on warning defense does not assume the DF-21 or DF-2016 because they're pre-2019, and their brands evidence assumes accidental war assumes states are perfectly rational when in reality they are not. Accountants. The relations to defense was answered above, but we do not need to overcome, but the AF overcomes that signal because the SES is uniquely important to China topicality. 1, we meet this, they foreclose all activation. The SES 2, substantially means considerable prosperity. Substantially means considerable value does not apply to statement over the means substantially one situation may be another. 3, limit the conditions refers to the cast of the dares of the alliance. Substantial limit is not a term of R2 of 15 are variable measures whether or not a defense back limit the conditions under which the defense obligations are invoked. The defensive obligations are only invoked if a member is attacked by a specific adversary in a specific occasion or without provocation. 4, arbitrary. Their evidence context is disanalogous from alliance commitments. It defines substantial limit, not substantially limiting. Arbitrary interrupts with the goalposts and are unfair if limits are all the matter counter. Only our office topical. 5, legal context. Limited and eliminated are distinct places on a spectrum. Current 6, the Congress can limit or eliminate all can be seen as distinct. 6, over limits. They leave 4 AFs only advocated by Cato, Breitbart, and Jacobin magazine. Their inter results in stale debates where the AF gets crushed by reaching just for generic answers instead of nuance. 7, AF ground. We can't beat PICs and to only reduce military presence. Even NATO withdrawal can struggle to find an answer for semester. 8, functional limits. All few solvency advocates and PICs side the defense back. 4, 9, competing interests creates a race at the bottom. Substantial lends itself to reasonability. Unstable 93. Substantial deficits ambiguity. Substantial inherently imprecise. Substantial has a reasonable standard, i.e. would a reasonable mind accept it. Phil's counterplan. 1, permutation to both shields the link because it was being seen as simultaneous action. 2, international fiat is a voting issue justifies object fiat like China doesn't go to war. It's unpredictable because there's infinite actors to prep, and saying it's just the ally is arbitrary. Request counterplan solved. 3, it links more to every disadvantage because kick-out would crush credibility. That's the card they read on the case. 4, permutation to the counterplan. 5, it does not solve the Biden advantage. It is not a clear presidential signal of cooperation. So the counterplan would cause extinction. Now the state's counterplan. 1, permutation to both shields the link because it would do both simultaneously. 2 counterplan. 3, uniform 50 state fiat is unfair. AF deficits depend on non-uniformity because federalism debate concerns experimentation versus centralization. 4, Biden does not follow on defense lobby incentives to maintain existing alliance policy. But wait, 5, clear signals from Biden are key to avoid accidents. Unconditional signals from heads of state key to sociological goodwill. The SES, the counterplan signals presidential reluctance. 6, the counterplan gets struck down or it overturns Curtis Wright. U1, cross represented the court of the Department of Foreign Affairs. After this requires the federal government to violate laws that interfere with the national government's international relations. It is a notion that can trace itself to Curtis Wright. Curtis Wright, the court's language does not emphasize the federal government's power to praise. The president is the president who has discretion to enjoy the discretion to calibrate. Sanction 7, sole Oregon doctrines key to manage China rise. Cole 15, the willingness of the Republican Party to take the foreign policy and political gamemanship with the fragmentation of the American power from Benghazi to the Islamic State to around the Council regime of the nuclear diplomacy on Abiy and Air voted to the one voice talking to continue to reassure allies and enemies to the U.S. is not likely to manage China's rise or the Middle East if Congress continues their institution. 8, it does not solve control over nuclear weapons that are federally controlled causes extinction. That was on the first advantage. In 9, uncooperative federalism crushes mask mandate. Actually, this whole thing is so stupid. I'm not even going to read this mask mandate add-on. The recommend counterplans are a voting issue because they justify consult commissions and NEPA. We get new answers because the explanation that the National Guard controls nuclear weapons is total nonsense. Hotlines counterplan. 1, do both. 2, permutation to the plan and any accommodation to the plan. 3, China does not answer the phone. They only the plan creates the willingness to use CVM. Sentence or artists. 18, Americans begin solving a problem by verbally stating explicitly. Chinese rely on tacit understanding. The Washington hotline establishment was cut off by enemies just when the U.S. would have wanted to call when the problems arise. The Americans want to talk more and the Chinese less. 4, the counterplan is the status quo and it's one line long, which that was cross-6. We totally roasted this. 5, the code of conduct fails. Xiang 3, 8, the Chinese ASEAN have a common understanding of the yes, the Western countries wanted the ability to use the freedom of navigation to serve the situation. Australia and Britain have conducted freedom of navigation operations in the bid to challenge Chinese territorial claims in Malaysia, Vietnam, Brunei, and Taiwan. If the ASEAN and China were unable to meet face-to-face, the governments want to get the pandemic under control before they use the code of conduct. Conditionality destroys too easy flexibility. This counterplan is ridiculous. We can't read a DA to any plank because they take it. Dispo solves. The resolve DA. 1, economy impact empirically denied by 2008 and COVID. 2, resolve theory suspect. Fisher 16. There's no evidence Ally changes behavior based on rapid study examined 1980. The answer to deterrence was not associated with firmness. Khrushchev threatened the Berlin would back. Now the U.S. didn't consider it less credible though. The allies speak of reputation, but they do not believe in it. Reputation theory says allies would want the U.S. to intervene when the opposite is true. Belief and credibility does not come from allies; it comes from us. 3. Resolve causes Chinese testing. Best data confirms McKinney about 19. Chinese disruptiveness is not addressing further disputes over a limited point of the base evidence indicates that China's acted assertively, but when it believed that resolve was in question, responding to provocations of the weakness of China's own positions. 4. Semiconductors impact solved by Africa and Latin America. 5. No Taiwan war. Taiwan focus 11. 6. The conflict is unlikely because of research fellows said that neither side of U.S. wars and interest. The PLA does not have full confidence over the victory. China is not prepared to take Taiwan by force, but not venture into such a high risk maneuver. You can also cross-play all the impact terms we read on the case because they've dipped on a stupid DA. Now the called counterplan DA thing. 1. Permutation to both. 2. Permutation to the counterplan. 3. Permutation plan enter into prior binding consultation with Senator Menendez over the plan. 4. They cannot just say plan. That is unfair. It justifies skewing them and inserting text. We'll insert a future permutation. 5. Recommend counterplans are a voting issue. Justifies committees. NEPA veto cheater and those are unpredictable and distract no topic education. 6. Menendez says no. He's a hawk. 317. Congress is program progressive. The Hawks beaching is the threat that Menendez said to engage. That's another story. 7. It doesn't solve the Biden advantage. Consultation with Hawks weakens the signal of the plan. 8. Gun control thumbs. Peterson 323. Biden called for China gun laws, reviving the debate on the Hill to pass legislation. Shooting was intensified debate on Capitol Hill, moving it from the top of the agenda. The Biden asked given a political capital. I said I hope so. Toomey said he was talking about whether they could tweak the mansion. Toomey proposal. 9. The plan says the United States federal government. Fiat means Menendez supports the plan. 10. The plan doesn't cost BC. Renata 11. Biden will push hard into Georgia even if it means losing an ally. Biden can manage. Biden experience foreign policy. The Senators Democratic Party repeatedly called out leaders to government Germany. He and Mark even advantage from entering the pressure to take a hardline stance would come from his own party rights. 11. PC isn't real. Roberts. 12. Under Obama, PC was limited to the conservative movement to organize purely to live the partisan politics. 0. Some Democrats relied on sequencing and imagining PC. 2. Few of them realized there was a new era of near total polarization, bifurcating ecosystem for maximal partisan advantage. Gerrymander. Merrick Garland and RBG. 12. Calls anti-Israel won't pass and causes Israel war. Wise. 322. The Senate is facing a privilege directly call for problems leading wars against the move of the embassy. It is not surprising that the senators are wondering why call should be given an upgrade. The Middle East experts have consistently opposed the move. A call maintains its previous view of the Palestinian conflict. Israel lash out goes nuclear. McConnell 17 because of its history. Israel uniquely terrified of being alone and insufficient. The U.S. is bagging away inside Israel, behaving aggressively. Israel turning itself into nuclear desperado, striking oil states in the Gulf. 13 won't pass. Menendez and not key. O'Brien 324. The cinema goes to defeat of the Republican supporters. Less likely the Schumer can call nomination with the debate of limited to 4 hours of delay. That means the Pentagon won't have a policy chief until mid-April. The Senate leaves 2 weeks. Access the plan solves Duterte's 2022 election. Hidarian 19 Duterte. Opposition favor tougher position in the waters. Lacks on a leading presidential candidate. Call for the indication of the embassy. Duterte is facing pressure to upgrade the treaty. That's key to successor selection. Causes instability. Hidarian Duterte, the Filipino president, constrained with only a single term in office, undergoing the long-term reforms. Duterte's ability to shape the post-22 landscape will depend on political capital, decisive factors, crisis management, extinction. Hidarian 18 Duterte fuels authoritarian revival. Southeast Asia despair about democracy has gone hand in hand with autocratic regimes. Duterte's objective of democracy is defined, ready to embolden regional autocrats, undemocratic parties, and practices across the region.
All right, you good?
Can I quickly just connect my external monitor so I can see?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, looks like just needed to cool down. I'm good.
Okay. So the substantial counterinterp, it says that apps have to be of considerable value. I think that I'm of considerable value if I go to Europe and then someone reads an app that's like,
before.
we have, it's a good cross-sex.
The Supreme Court has accepted that's considerable, can be measured qualitatively. It could be.
Okay, you're just you know a question I was going to ask. Answer the question. You're just explaining that the Supreme Court said your thing.
I was trying to answer and you cut me off.
Okay,
the
sure.
point is there are qualitative ways to assess the considerability of a proposal. For example,
well, how?
Like I'm about to explain, you could say, are there scholars in the main that support it? Is this geopolitically significant? Is this a current event?
How many scholars? What's geopolitically significant?
These are all different examples, but the important thing is that would be evaluated on a case-by-case basis, which we've also read.
Case by case. Okay, how would anyone reading the text of your counterinterpretation come to that conclusion? What line in your counterinterpretation card support what you just said?
Some dude
I don't care that it's citing a court. What line in your counterinterpretation card?
Substantial, it's a legally precise term, considerable.
Let me ask a question. What line in your counterinterpretation card supports those two things you just said about geopolitical significance or a significant level of scholarship? It just says considerable value. What's considerable?
Okay,
who gets to determine what's considerable?
Which is our point that substantial limit is not a term of art. It has to substantially limit the adversary's locations.
You're not answering the question.
Types.
How do we determine what is considerable?
Okay, there are many different ways you can determine what is. Dude, this is so stupid. We read an app that fucking withdraws from the SCS, and your answer
you're just saying things. You're not answering the question.
Go back to Berkeley or wherever and cut a new neg. This is not.
You're just saying things. is there a way to determine what is considerable based off of the text of your counter interpretation?
Yes, it does not imply a specific number of cutoff. What is substantial in one situation is not.
So what's the
substantial in
cutoff?
another. Sorry,
So what's the cutoff?
I said it
Because
is
you
not.
you
determined
literally
by
just
the
said earlier
number
in cross
cutoff.
that it is numerical.
Okay, you can determine it by the apps have to limit an adversary provocation or location. You can determine that by determining if they are of value or worth. For example,
So
if you
any
read an
app that
was
limits
like,
any
don't defend
what-
against
what-
aliens, that may
of
not
value
be
to
of
who?
value or worth because there are no aliens. We
What?
don't know
A
that they
value to
exist.
who? So you limit out the aliens app. Do you limit out any other apps?
Yeah, I'm certain we might limit out the bloody
Which
nose
ones?
app. That's it might not be.
You might
substantial.
limit out the bloody nose app. Why not? Like, wouldn't that be of value to some
You're gonna
people?
spend all 3 minutes across on just like accomplishing.
You
the
got to
thing.
answer these questions.
Okay, like that wasn't a question. So what is?
It was a question. Isn't the bloody nose app of value to people?
I don't think so. Maybe not because it's unlikely that it would
Okay,
even happen.
maybe
at
not.
all. So one test
Okay.
is inherency can be used to determine whether or not the case is substantial.
Okay.
But you have to
I guess
read this in
okay.
conjunction with
I'm
our
gonna
other cards. Like
I'm gonna get in one more question here. The cred DA, the cred theory wrong card seems to only speak to like allied credibility or like
no,
spillover in the
I mean,
context of
that
allies.
highlighted that, but it's allies and adversaries.
But you didn't highlight that. Okay, great.
10. I stopped at 5:45. Drop that in the chat. And sending the 2NC. Julian can pass me the stand. Is everyone good for an order? Okay. It's T. The hotlines counter plan. The politics DA. The kickout counter plan. The state's counter plan. Advantage 1. Just let me close out of docs so I don't like crash my computer again. Okay. I would need that order again. Okay. If you're good, can I get a thumbs up? 1, 2, 3, 4. Rom. Perfect. The only definition in the resolutional phrase substantial limit is from FOP versus Saina. I'm saying that an act prohibits one method of solicitation is not a substantial limit because it leaves open alternative means. That means to be topical first must eliminate the possibility for activation and not leave open alternative conditions that can activate the defense back. The ruling in FOP is from the 8th Circuit before federal appellate courts because they're the last word on overwhelming majority of legal issues. 2, impacts. 1, limits. Allowing the condition of the round makes any minor tweak or rearrangement of the periphery defense act topical every restriction to weapon type. Geographic limits provocation means plus an infinite number of conditions for all 4 areas and 30 NATO countries that makes snake preparation impossible, gives the F a structural advantage, and dexterous is intrinsic good in debate. 2, ground their interpretation lets the F no link out core negative D is like assurance by saying that since the plan is tiny, Dimas can spin as a readjusting the alliance, not actually limitation. They open up alliance good advantages speaking minor parts of the alliance or delimiting alliance commitments to the US to revitalize the alliance, which destroys the stasis. 4, all negative ground reference clash over core country. This topic destroying topic education, which is the only portable school you do not meet your interpretation because you leave open alternative means for activation. That was the first question. And what is he cross? So they said attacks on the mainland would still trigger, and the FFP decision ruled alternative means friends being a substantial limit since the tree can still be activated is not substantial. TLJ5, the court reasons statute has the statute not substantial limit solicitation friends may still be solicited by the air may solicit the person on the call, non the dear call is now the considerable counter interpretation. 1, their evidence defining substantial on its own. Our evidence delimits the defined substantial limit, even if it does mean considerable. That just means you interpret the phrase considerably limit to mean eliminate alternative means. 2, our evidence also circuit level and more recent. You consider controlling precedent if the 2 conflict. 3, their counter to impose a qualitative requirement to substantial that won't limit anything out that was cross-links, which is really damning because the only thing they says they maybe limit out the aliens off. Why the fuck is that an actual limit? Bloody knows would still be topical as anything can be considerable as long as someone says it is important, but you must interpret the resolution to give effect to every word. Their interpretation renders the word substantial meaningless in order to be reasonable, which has to be rejected even if it leads to unfavorable result. Atoms that didn't define worlds on the limits of price actually reaching considerable construction stage and the effect is all in that part of it is never courts are only starting to take on the language to leave the language clearly has that result not that was intent result for this obviously explodes limits and runes going all in Africa claim to be considerable because it is being considered that inclusion of substantial requires something to be considered non-substantial objective. Magic should be distinguished, make certain to legally use this variant 13 defining substantial by some are non-substantial like I subs like office the parent is distinguished substantial non-substantial non-substantial their evidence defining limits to conditions as a noun, but the resolution uses substantial limit as a verb. Obviously limits the conditions to be a term of art, but substantially limit the conditions is a verb phrase, just how our evidence interprets it means ours is a more accurate reading of the term, even if I think it's a silly distinction explanation for their argument about this precise term of art, which they are not. Here is their evidence for context. They also make its words so substantially in the resolution a dangling modifier, which is grammatically incorrect, results in absurd interpretation of the rest. The judges should err, which judges should err against. Our interpretation is the least arbitrary one. It does not have to be about alliance comments. If dictates require term of appear in the discipline in order to define a court's bar definitions all time as a clear precedent. 2, define substantial limit as a verb phrase. This is the exact topic language and use it to find how many past standpoint, i.e. activation, are necessary to qualify. That is a gold standard. None of their evidence comes close. 3, even if it's a little bit arbitrary, neg ground outweighs in every instance because it's wholly reactionary. The F can always do something, and there are advocates for ending defense facts, and the neg has nothing against island weapon of the weak after the wholly plea one side of the debate for engaging the counterfeitation only or is obviously ridiculous. Doesn't solve any of offense, nor does it solve any of theirs. Limit does not mean eliminate. One, this evidence is not definitions of summary factual power saying that they can limit interpretations or eliminate offices, even if they aren't used in the same context. They are saying limits cannot include eliminations. 2, limit is modified by substantially in the context of read the phrase or 1 and C and 2 and C evidence proves our reading is correct. Our reading is correct. I have the TLJ card above. Highlighted answers this. Over limiting is wrong. 1, there's a ton of background for eliminating advantages proven by everything you did first semester, which means that we don't get syllabates. It doesn't just become a cater topic. 2, over limiting is better because negative ground is reactionary. This is the NDT. You should preserve negative ground at all costs because they're already seeing an explosion maps. Therefore, even if we are slightly over limiting, you should prefer negative. You should vote negative on deterrence to deter teams from the time to deter teams from being tiny absolute in the future. We do not devastate Afghan. 1, there are 33 apps each need a member state, Korea, Japan, and the Philippines. That's 33 times the healthcare topic where AF teams did fine being negative innovation. 2, AF creativity doesn't stop with plans, new advantages, and mechanisms for withdrawal, naval flexibility. The top includes at least the AF has entire set of other alliances reductions like Hopcom, base removal, and plug distinguishable and flex, and no picks in pack 1. They're far worse as new AF. Can always have advantages if it's entrapment against a pick or against arguments thought that any defense pack violates domestic or international law, but new small apps leading with no offense out of the debate. 2, air negative threat of new small apps is real. This is the NDT and the exact power. NDT saw massive explosions of tiny apps that beat negative at every turn, but on the healthcare topic, there's comedic consensus on they have had to be everything. With our picks never materialize, mitigate the threat to ground exists. 3, debate theory norms evolve. Gregarious picks will always string the picks bad theory. For all this, remember that neg ground always outweighs the functional limits. There aren't any. They have to make small conditions, modifications, or clarifications that either sink the alliance so that the overwhelming majority attack assurance and attorneys don't linger up as gets straight turned out worse. CF gets months to be a plan that's answered the MDT pick solves. CF gets aren't a hard check on units and one rounders beat all that because that's some big small modifications and late elims on monopoly and preparation to be generics. Finally, reasonability for competing interpretations. 1, reasonability is arbitrary and encourages judge intervention way more likely they should the goal, especially because we have predictable evidence with intent to find which interpret is better, requires never judge intervention than an impact turn debate. Reasonability requires subjectivity. 2, creates a moral hazard to be as untopical as possible, still being reasonable and makes them possibly negative and megas are often 3, they are reasonable. That was above. Reasonability sides based on personal ideology and legitimized definitions that are otherwise easily challenged. According to 99, the notion of reasonable analysis of reference ideology reasonable is legitimized citation, which is a challenge introduction. Reasonable legitimacy was either true or collation mass the contradiction rather than the world we had for yes. These are the possibility different interpretation can be coupled with consecutive foundation with Stacey and I for the text and continuity factors. These are reasonable based on the maintaining divergent interpretation exclusive fix. Definitive interpretations, the hotlines counterplan. All can see the purpose test competition. We get infinite conditionality. 1, everything that says bad about condo is good. It creates cheap job lines, puzzles that are beneficial work through. 2, multiplying on card commands are extra. We need test every part of the app, especially new apps at the NDT with new plans. 3, negative flexibility goes hard defending options. 4, defense the pack completely steal the app. Can always weigh their interlinks as D is D and T approves skis noble and T obviously outweighs conditionality. 5, arbitrariness. There's no difference between 150 condo, no basis for condo theory and book rules, and nothing because that can modulate their interpretation to arbitrarily exclude the neg. The politics CA will concede gun control thumbs and PCs fake. That means they can't go for the link term for the all answer the Duterte add-on policies relevant Bernstein 20 dictate the majority of the organization rule the law he is a paradox by militaries and later prides being invested harmlessly many droids the highest approval brain example leader his strong populist leaders bypass crisis the man admits killing his popularity shop urgency 20 chairs leadership people all handling or investments his lack of serious policy fixing the damage already long task means worse with the jobs to the cops and it comes in history. Also Duterte is starting to abrogate the VFA now which should be a sufficient anti-US move for him to win re-election. Successor choices Nebel called on 20 appendage not assume technically all depending effort in the law based hammocks as terminated the VFA China offers without pressing human without pressing he writes a Philippines by determined muzzle domestic crisis down down ABSC and down he's not big on the promise CBN remains the Philippines kick a Kaplan all concede perm to best test competition. I'm not going for it theory reads the reason to reject the argument of the team states Kaplan same thing concede the perm theory reject the argument of the team advantage 1. Deterrence is true because China is currently testing the United States and the Philippines. They have 200 ships and with some reviews they prelude to a large invasion. The U.S. already recommitted, however, which should have triggered their impact. A conclusion of their one East rebels evidence indicates the U.S. said that we stand by our Philippine comrades. If they are right, the China feels so encircled, they should have escalated already. Session they have 200 ships in the region. They are clearly trying to take it over. Proves even if they're defensive generally, they're not in areas that they think belong to them, i.e. the SCS and everything within the 9-inch line. But it undermines American regional credibility, which is the impact you drop, even deterrence fails, doesn't matter because the SDS is the core of US, is the core of US alliance commitments in the region. That de-escalates every conflict they have, magnifies it because it just backs down in the face of new, and then in the face of new Chinese aggression. Deterrence works in the SDS when it's offense dominant. Chinese efforts are strategic liability because they're literally fake islands that have what we're launching them US missiles maybe have advantage at worst from Chinese escalation, which is terminal defense against their advantage. Geography is wrong because Chinese island bases are fucked too. Deterrence is strong now. The use is showing warfare capability confronts visions them, but it should have already triggered because the US has done massive moves in the past month under Biden to strengthen the Philippines alliance, which just proves that if they're right, but entrapment is wrong. Treaties themselves cause escalation. Korea causes draw, not the app, and their own evidence says all causes. It's Yoni 17, Cal's Blue, treaties in the South State of themselves. It's being on trigger the treaty between the U.S. and Japan. This is the most obvious case of the two Koreas. And even if entrapment is true, it's never driven escalation. Nuclear umbrella encourages peaceful resolution. Krug was getting time to avoid fighting and bargaining the way out of it. Philippines doesn't fear entrapment either side of Washington. They want the commitment. They also won't be aggressive. But in 20 Philippines, if you're bound to back simultaneously, is nigger said Beijing, the U.S. national invasion, two down by salty beach Philippines looks to call up independence. Look, entrapment is massively disproven because the U.S. has already said we will back them now. Even entrapment happens and should have already escalated. And there are tons of all causes to Chinese divisions. But audience cause means it doesn't escalate. How does Second Island change check? There wasn't a war for this. U.S. revisionism is just fake because every state is revisionist because to the extent that it has interest, the app doesn't solve the app doesn't collapse. The use of Germany means it's on level, but there's no arms. The same fact is the U.S. overmatch doubling, even the doubling the budget means they're 6 times less than China. Even it makes conventional conflicts more likely to deter and solve those. And China, if they're right that China is defensive, doesn't want to be aggressive, they will back down once they get what they want. Grasslex?
Are you good?
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to start with the top of the 2NC. You began with, our evidence is the only card that defines the word in the resolution. Put the resolution in the Zoom chat
the
right
phrase
here.
in the resolution.
Okay, well, where do you
the
see the phrase substantially limit in the resolution? It's substantially limiting.
It's
so
substantially limiting, which is the closest analog we have.
Okay,
you have defined the word substantial and the words limit as two different things.
But
however, the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals said substantially limit together is a term of art.
You've defined that substantial limit is a term of art, not that substantially limiting is a term of art. So how can you go for precision when you haven't even defined the word in the topic?
We, quote, I'm just going to read from the FOP 1NC card, quote, we turn to whether North Dakota's regulation substantially limits solicitation.
Okay, it's not substantially
It does
limiting.
not.
My next question is about your claim that there are 33
it's
cases.
Close enough, and it's the closest you're going to get. If you want to go for arbitrariness, that's double to some extent. Limits that way.
I have a separate question. You said there are 33 cases in the NATO area. NATO Article 5 very clearly stipulates that an attack on one is an attack on all. Is it your claim that topical AFs can defend selectively one country, like don't defend Portugal? Like can you name a solvency advocate?
Topical AFs under our interpretation must end the entirety of alliance pacts. That means that, for example, defending Portugal.
We have a pact.
Let me finish, Rom. Let me finish. Are you gonna let me finish? Those AFs are topical under your interpretation because they could be considerable, because they are large and people could write about them and say that they are important.
Okay.
They do not meet our interpretation because a substantial limitation means there must be no other avenues open for it to happen. Therefore, for example, if we only eliminate our pact to the Portugal, we could still activate Article 5 for like the Baltics.
Thank you for answering my question. Can you name a solvency advocate a team has read this year that does not come from the Cato Institute or from a critical theory / Marxist perspective?
First, I think you read cards that weren't necessarily the Cato Institute. I know there are, I know people are, I know there are Korea advocates that aren't from them.
Name an author.
I don't know actual author names because this topic has changed a lot. It's very big.
Okay, can you name a single
obviously the fact that I can't
read a solvency advocate for any withdrawal?
Pittsburgh, their South Korea withdrawal isn't from Korea, isn't from Cato or them.
Okay,
but the other thing too that I want to add here is Rob Layfish. The thing I think is most important in the boat you're missing is that yes, solvency advocates might be from right wing hacks. Sure, they write good cards. It proves that there's opportunities for debate.
Is what we have.
My vision of debate is
or the Gonzaga. We read pick out of NATO withdrawal from Walton Mearsheimer, which is and then the AF went for prolif good from Cato. Is that your vision of what the God? I love it.
My vision. Yeah, because it allows for in-depth
prolif
debate,
good versus withdrawal
alliance commitment. Yeah, sure. Entrapment too is a massive literature controversy. I don't know what you're trying to do.
Okay, the one I was sent. Actually, we're gonna take prep real quick. Okay. The one hour is sent. It's the resolve advantage or the rel's advantage than the resolve DA. Yeah.
Sorry, what was the advantage at the top?
The rel's advantage, like advantage 2.
Right.
All right. Can I just get like thumbs up for everyone when they got it? Who's got it? Yeah. Cool.
The app isn't sufficient to solve anything. Think of all of the obvious sticking points in U.S.-China relations that pop up in the news every day. We've held animosity towards China for years. Do you really think this is going to be the one thing that reverses years of disputes between the U.S. and China? Biden is committed to antagonizing China broadly and won't try for a reset. That means even if the app temporarily bolsters relations, they'll get shot down the road when Biden refuses to compromise on future things. That's the Mitchell Evans. COVID's a massive all-cause COVID. Turn the U.S. away from diplomatic engagement with China. No one HC card says the app is sufficient to overcome that animosity. That's the Alden Evans. Chinese leadership is impossible. There's distrust now because of how China handled COVID. There were multiple cover-ups and propaganda campaigns that shot their credibly on the world stage. That's also hedges to name what we can externalize negative externalities. Even if we declined, if it declined, we'd be unmatched economically or militarily by a huge margin. No state can match this. That's a normal evidence. No China launch and warning China doesn't think of first seconds like so. Their arsenal is off alert. That's lucky. Even if they do decide to change it, though, it would take years. So the day's quick impact happens first. That's lucky. Miscount is debate science fiction. Wars never start by accident. If neither side wants war, they'll find a way to resolve the dispute peacefully. Their authors instead it's complete accidental unintentional war. That's the brain's evidence. The resolve. The sad fractured resolve causes quick Chinese fate accompli of Taiwan that goes nuclear that way on time frame because Xi is looking for a gap now. Chang 126G fills the military be ready for war. A second exercise signal China is about to provoke a crisis. China's leadership new president is the most probable in terms of impact. Black hole 3 on Taiwan is the most dangerous flashpoint in the world. The spark world is Jaws in the U.S., China, Japan, and others. Biden should develop a credible strategy to her watches neglected, distracted by other problems. How much Taiwan has changed in the last few years. Hong Kong had large effects in geopolitics. Taiwan favor President China regards as a separatist. China's double down on national escalating pressure. Taiwan war danger is now played due to human tendency to assume whatever combination of our will be like to say most words. Comes as far as all fails and bolts of Iran test to escalate as saw 21 to do, but in facing a random military sector early attempt to engage its resolve of the challenge will have for future interactions with adversaries elsewhere in the world to receive by launch strikes on Israel, testing a ballistic missile, having destructive cyber attack against critical infrastructure attacking Israeli territory to escalate for responsible rules incredibly increased leverage to help Iran nuke war extinction every 12 World War III escalation would be absolutely automatic. Lose would have no choice to respond despite the change of time or attack. The fact that would be drawn into for nuclear purposes. The latest destruction of the boss. We also have an external econ impact. Taiwan invasion destroys U.S. economic primacy because it sees control of microchip manufacturing to China. That's a risk. As econ decline causes nuclear without economic primacy, the U.S. cannot maintain order abroad and national security crashes. That's how independent econ primacy solves the act because it means that the U.S. would have the resource base to deter China and win a war over the Philippines. You didn't read a COVID thumbs econ card, even if the argument's intuitive. This is debate. It's a game. You need cards. 2008 was the exception. Sooner than recovery. Since it would different non-conventional policies, if you have another crisis, there are concerns about large scale economic crisis combined with office and jiggling with such skills beyond control. Into world war intervention, the little adjust underlying weaknesses. Illiquidity doesn't happen. Well allocated economic resources team. Like the permanent arrest of conflict and even war. Yet some conflicts essentially may exacerbate the conflicts of the three opportunities have been willing misfortune outside certain increasing inequality followed by great crisis such could really cause a future crisis protected economically realistically those are confrontation you find hedge noble doesn't take out the disside because our cards all assume a high level of American military primacy and says the war is still likely. Hedge is also irrelevant if China debts resolve, which is the thesis of the disside. Credit theory wrong has no implication. They haven't highlighted the card to say adversaries only about allies. This isn't a credit spillover. Disside is just about the adversary the app directly interacts with, but credibility theory is true. Brands 18 policymakers generally behave as though credible cards demonstrate to resolve are independent scholars taking more skeptical views. People also make a scare shift as sure skeptics in the critiques are probably overstated accepting past behavior has no impact requires accepting rule. No rules of action are suspended. The person reading exam community it appears as determining credit and illusion requires accepting all officials losing otherwise odds are well after assembly mistaking growing literature indicating critiques of credit are unpersuasive pack actions and resolve to influence expectations alliance violations back increase likelihood challenge will escalate repeating and encourages more severe challenge later reducing to have the opposite effect credit resolve do more than victims of imagination. The link debate China is looking to test Biden over Taiwan. They believe in U.S. resolve it anyway when that that faith unleashes military action to solidify national interest. The plans perceived weakness of both Chinese credibly test and other theaters are watching every policy move and are itching to test us and knock evidence. Backing down the SCS over the Philippines is particularly damning. It sends a signal that might makes right in the SCS that green lights Chinese aggression makes the US weak. That's parts woman. The McKinney card is terrible. It just says quote resolve. Doesn't say war. Doesn't say Taiwan war. It also doesn't say US return sparks Chinese resolve. This says just that China increases resolve in response to provocation. But they read cards here that China thinks that SCS returns is provocative. The plan hands China products which involves quick Taiwan war. NACA 128 China's plays feud between Taiwan and the products in the SCS. The short route will take China shift between Taiwan and the Philippines. The products on the border war is being played out between the US and China. China have been running sophisticated occupation. Other products are being assessing the Biden's resolve. The US need to respond because set the wrong seal. I believe Biden maybe hasn't taken action. China made military maneuvers against Taiwan. US resolve is strong in Taiwan now coming in CS says demand strong response. Chang 126 China exercise center warned about it not take long to push back and see it. Usually saving calling on China to seize pressure declaring coming to Taiwan is rock solid as powerful as Zimbabwe Navy. Carrier striker entered the SES and exercise signal China's about to provoke crisis. China's leaders his new presence over the South China CG is going after Taiwan policy. Biden is resolute watching engage Taiwan in China is no longer wheels of video American policies on. They're looking for any gap in resolve. Chang 126 exercise signal China's about to provoke crisis. China's leaders new president Xi is going after Taiwan policy. Biden is resolute. We're watching to engage with Taiwan. China wants to veto American policy to Thailand. China's in pre-war mode. Hold a low threshold for the link back 031. China is moving to pre-war mode. Is appearing condition to possibly armed conflict is engaging now. In military preparation are weighing the readiness of the armed forces across contingencies. The impact debate there, semiconductors. Answer is a warrantless analytic. Don't let the 1AR blow it up. You need to have a warrant. You can have analytics, but you need warrants to support them. Their Taiwan defense is older than our cards from March that the China is likely to escalate over Taiwan. Now their cards from Taiwan Focus, which is literally a random news column. It also assumes status quo resolved and deterrents, both of which the AF undermine. China's testing resolved now, and the US is firm. Back down, escalate. Bloomberg 21 China fly. Aircraft in Taiwan Strait sends an early warning about the State Department issued a statement affirming rock solid commitment to Taipei. Energy Beijing to see special we see adjusting region China. The US over Taiwan. There's two giants to figure out where they can test resolve guidance because all we got is built because China's right to the US wants to prevent Taiwan from miscalculating. So it's like to make clear as result of intimidation of Taiwan. Chinese looking to see how Biden will respond to China's behavior. Will take a strong stance on the soft and decisive. China perceives a credible to turn time North 19 Obama from big commitment Senkaku Islands we exclusively covered having alliance with deep in the US. Balancing with the mechanism socializing China's aggressive behavior. China curb violation the alliance halted to China's violation, socialization. Eventually led to more stable situations in response to China's behavior. Proper moderation. China's more aggressive course use involvement has been the key factor in the Caucasus crisis. Socialization played out as mutual actors on China posture. Alliance commitments. China's defensive role is showing 17 offensive ability. China as the called global stability state security through power maximization. China can be expected to crash over hegemony, although officially seek coexistence with the rest. If this preference will evolve with China's capacity, China's become aggressively gained economic capacity. China seem to expand competition with major states. Beijing responded to the tribal legitimately by saying it does not expect or recommend the decision maximizing strategic just to further anticipate China will not show a frontiers conflict states or refer to the PCC hegemony. China's not an exception, and China's military power is growing. What's up? They can't go for impact defense because the argument is about nationalists don't apply to Taiwan. They don't have a 1AC card about Taiwan.
Okay, stop. Should be set. The order is going to be advantage 1, advantage 2, the DA, and then T. All right, everyone good to go? Awesome. The U.S. is not recommitted to the Philippines now because they have not invoked the NDT, which means the next few days is a test of U.S. policy. We need to back out before becoming trapped as a robust evidence that says they are planning on activating the defense back at a turn. The 2NC drop the ball in our answers. That matters to the all indict the DA2. China status seeking will not pounce on the perception of decreased resolve. 2NC 133 deterrence fails now and resolve a shot. 1 capabilities are low now and deterrence is unsustainable. They are planning invasion now. China's insurmountable geographical advantages that conferred H3D advantage. U.S. assets are ill-suited for the region and saying bases are fucked is not a warrant. That is our O'Connor McKinney evidence. 2 interest asymmetry. China does not think we'll trade San Francisco for a pile of worthless rocks. The expected value is far higher for Chinese leaders, and the U.S. means rational deterrence slips after audience costly means China can't back down. War says the SES possesses unique national significance and it would be politically costly to capitulate. The no causes nobody raised the car saying Japan or Soka will entrap the U.S. now that they're pursuing hostile policy. Unica says the SES is the core issue. Yes, entrapment is the process, not an event. The process has already begun. They have no evidence about the Whistling Reef. That matters to further specificity of our scenario that threatens nuclear war in the next few weeks. 2C4, the second island chain checks. The 2NC basically just said no, we weren't. We read a car. Their impact did not happen for 70 years because we did not need the MDT and the SES. Other assets like Guam, Hawaii, and Hiroshima check and maintain deterrence. Hegemony is bad. Finally, impact turns to DA. The U.S. is far more vicious than China. Our king evidence is that peacefully accommodating China's territorial claims is key to save off transition because China will not behave like a traditional rising European power. It makes war inevitable. Stands backing down. China's status seeking is the only way to reconcile inconsistent Chinese behavior. China supports non-proliferation in the climate but disagrees on the WTO. Theorizing revision is yes, no, and is untenable. And the bloc didn't really read any cards in an alternate explanation of Chinese behavior. The Biden advantage, despite Cal's posturing, all these sticking points are largely uncarded. Our pie evidence is the plan to signal of good faith cooperation that can kickstart relations and de-escalate the security dilemma. The SES matters. All their examples are about general animosity or areas like COVID. The plan signals a decline in military containment, which runs accidents in the South China Sea and other regions, enable psychological disarm, which is the only turn link we need to win. Yes, miscalculate. They just repeated the tag of 1C cars. Slogan says it's likely because intermutual conventional nuclear assets. The resolve DA, the overview 1 timeframe presumes some access can impact. They need to win the cumulative probability of internal links to Iran, answered by the Cred defense because U.S. policy in Asia doesn't affect Iran, and China stabilizes the Middle East. Check in 14 as the region accounts for over half of China's import. China maintains relationships with governments such as Syria and Iran. Stability, toxicity, dealers, energy, essential. China better equipped to help governments find sustainable models. 3C1, no econ impact, empirically denied by 2008 and thumbed by COVID. They have no reason. Taiwan is a linchpin of the global economy, and downturn won't cause war. Walton, 20 diversionary wars, so it's unlikely even one of gross empirical flaws. It's hard to imagine a large scale war when levels are already soaring. The easier ways to stimulate the economy. Downturn can encourage war and social strengths. The U.S. has suffered 40 recessions, yet fought 20 wars unrelated to the economy. States don't start wars. Lots of the real way to achieve victory. Prime motivation for wars is secret economic gain. A drop down to the Cred theory debate. Cred theory is BS. Only we have studies with Fisher cites models from 1900 to 1980 proving commitment to not spill over. The highlighting does not matter because obviously it's about general perceptions in IR relations broadly, and they're only Evans brands. He's biased. Johnson 19 brands organization that have contributed Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, Raytheon Company, Secor Holdings, Boeing brands have clear interest in the upcoming Sun treatment billion defense budget brands are pushing for. We learned to hand experts funded by the tobacco industry or clients they spend funded by big oil. Why do we brands receive sizable funds to the weapons industry that should pay $100,000 from group funded only exclusively by weapons makers? Prefer comparative research. Schultz research in 1819 that Evans convinced the notion that convinced are independent, not a Soviet. For anything American credit for social psychology, 6 unlikely reputation for result calculus 3 privileged balance of power exams. Nazi Germany, Britain, France, as well as Euro currency over Italy and Cuba. The case for Gillis simply sure. Concern concerned about could we ignore the enemy's history. Finally, no Taiwan war or China can't win. They know it. They won't try to take this trade. It would undermine regime stability, even if the result is not perfect. Does not need to be to deter China, which is our TF evidence. Now, topicality at the top. Limits and ground will be answered on functional lists below. The framing issues. This topic is already neg side bias, constrained by the lack of advocates and MDT key. Warrants the neg goes too far by inverting the neg strategic balance. 2 through 5 or counter interpretation 1. Substantial means considerable. Or pro 7 is defining it as anything else is impossible. As any definition differs between context, i.e., disability law or North Dakota court cases are acontextual to the resolution. 2 answers most of the perfectly posturing from across 16. There's not one way to define substantial. Theirs is worse because it applies evidence from a different domain altogether, like housing and charitable donations, which is explicitly rejected by courts. 3, no link to Adams evidence. We're not ignoring substantial. We counter defined it. 4, the distinction between substantial and substantially eliminated is irrelevant and overrated. It's more accurate in the fraternal order of police from North Dakota, perhaps not for alliance policy. Plus, our Shiba evidence defines it. Limited conditions as Tassus Fideris and their ev defines substantial limit, not substantially limit. Dean, Barnes, and Thornburg and 9, EDC, just in the current language, is defining substantial limits and set forth rules of construction to govern whether an impairment is substantial limiting. So substantial limit should be construed broadly and should not require such analysis. Impairment need not substantially limit more than one activity. Of 5, limit does not mean eliminate. That is our current evidence. That means there would be no topical aspect of their interest. So withdrawal would not be a limit. It would be full abrogation of the defense facts. The modifier doesn't matter because the word limit implies that it cannot be a full reduction. Substantial means considerable. It's the common meaning. Court of Appeals 97. The cardinal rules of construction. The common meaning is substantial considerable. The legislature chose not to define substantial. This apply common meaning. Got legislative definition. Common meaning definitions are most predictable. There's multiple different possible contexts. Courts defer to qualitative tests. Supreme Court of Virginia 17. We have not defined substantial in this context. Where substantial simply means important. The phrasing is explicitly distinguished from termination. Seed in 20. Res 3 substantially limiting. Res 4 terminating. Substantially limit means major. MDHS 13. Substantially limit means restricted and performing a major activity. Substantial limitation should apply the broadest context. So does 14. Substantial limitation need not be as it used to. So Toyota v. Williams held substantially be. Congress passed the amendments rejecting this demanding standard in favor of broad coverage. Drop down to 2EC6 and standard over limiting 1. Their inter leaves no ask. We dare them to find a single card to advocate withdrawal in any area that is not from a libertarian or a Marxist. Dartmouth be the only pick with German pro good, and Emory did not have a solvency card. 2, after it's that way, this topic is neg bias. They the holy grail topic. DA's Biden crushes have solvency arguments. 3, education devils in the details. Withdrawal be prolif is an overly simplistic debate. Their vision a debate is childish of both teams making absolute claims instead of nuanced ones. Their picks bad theory argument magnifies it because they restrict the most obvious answer with the withdrawal. 4, picks are unbeatable in a world where the ass stuck with full withdrawal and has to defend tiny lines minutiae. It's not worse because the neg gets unlimited fiat. 5, in this context, over limiting outweighs under limiting even if they win their generic ass side bias arguments. The neg is doing fine on this topic. Does not need constraints, which means generic appeals to neg round do not apply. Insofar as their vision creates the same 4 aspects round, there are not 33 NATO asks. We have 1 commitment to NATO. There's no reason nobody's reading Poland or Canada now. 2EC 8 and 9, functional limits of reasonability. 1, defense fact pick. The F is tied to Article 5. The neg can remove anything else. The prolifity links are the best thing since sliced bread. 2, solvency advocates cross like Cato from above. They're no easier to find for lit because mainstream academics are strongly neg biased. 3, case in politics is preposterous and can't be a 2 any flows. 4, cold of limits empirically not. Kansas for reading must ban interps since the 2014-15 executive power topics. 5, reasonability is good as the good enough. The credit I always minor on limiting judge intervention is inevitable by evidence valuation. It's corroborated by courts. Theirs is from Marxist law, which proves our arbitrariness offense. Court jurisprudence concurs. Bermuda 96. The difference is important. Some circuit fully limited, so the court only limited or fully limited, only limited.
Okay, 5:43 starting. Can you pass me the stand, Julian? T. Everyone good? Julian, can you mute? Cool. Can I get a thumbs up from everyone? I think I got nods, but just wanted like make sure. Cool. The only definition of the topical phrase substantially limiting is from FOP. They must end the possibility for activation and leave out alternative conditions for activation. To me, our interpretation, there are two impacts. One, limits. They cause conditions of the round, which means that they can do minor tweaks to any single number of the treaties in order to meet their interpretation. This is especially bolstered because we have very strongly concluded based off of 2AC cross-examination their inability to prodate their evidence, to prodate their counter-interpretation in the 1AR, that their interpretation of substantial means absolutely meaningless and does nothing to prevent these one-off conditions as to being their interpretation. We are already seeing an explosion of new tiny apps. It is round 4 of the NDT. You should think that there are more coming, and you all probably know what they are as well. That means that your only job should be preserving any sort of limits on the topic to prevent an explosion for the rest of the Elam round. Second is round, which was completely conceded, and they do not have any chance of winning an internal link to it because the 1AR did not say the word ground besides saying Afghan always. So it will be answered down the line by line, but having an unlimited number of means the Afghan link out of core generics, they can gain advantage off of saying alliance code, which flips all of their functional limits. Offense is the only real defensive argument that Tyler invested any time in the status quo because this was the core construct of whether or not entrapment or whether alliance command should actually exist in the first place because it gives the Afghan an unlimited number of link turns. Those link turns could be inevitable under our interpretation because everyone will obviously try and find a way to strengthen alliances. However, they are impossible to deal with when there are near infinite number of modifications. The apps can make their interpretation. They have dropped it as a judge instruction that your only role should be preserving the role of the negative. The apps on an Elim came straight. There is a reason why affirmative teams won pretty much every round, pretty much every debate round 3. That means that the only thing that you should consider when doing impact calculus is which interpretation makes it easier for the neg to compete on already half biased topic independently. When deciding between interpretations, your role should be to decide the counter interpretation debate as a court judge. Which interpretation is the most legally acceptable? Spoiler alert, it's ours because they ignore the most recent court rulings, don't cite any superior court evidence from the past that is not older than me, and they define words individually when the Supreme Court already has a test to determine if something substantially limits, which they just reject. The topic is not neg bias. I answered above. I answered above. We don't have strategic thinking when there's no warrant for this too. They do it as well because small step is picks. They don't have solvency advocate, which historical defense all their offense down their counter interpretation at the top. Their interp does violence to the law. It ignores the most recent court rulings of substantially limiting and makes the word substantially dangling modifier, which results in absurd interpretations. The resolution that should be rejected. Another frame is that the 1AR spent about 10 times as long on this page as the 2AC did. The Tom read the 2AC short, which means that you should reject every single new 1AR argument because we invested a ton of time based off of a 2AC strategic misstep to not answer our very new and creative interpretation of T substantial. The substantial conservative is wrong because sunset limit to context does matter because they're very easy application because you can determine if the affirmative leaves open opportunities for the treaty to be applied which is very easily slots into topic wording, which should also be something you consider. They require you shift out multiple different words. They define each word differently and define different words in different terms of art and different phrases. That means you should heavily default negative because at worst we have a clear interpretation for what debates under our term or under what our topic look like. They are just going for an impact term, but they don't have a reason why their counter interpretation is bad. Different domain doesn't matter because because the FOP evidence as a test that so apply the TLJ evidence indicates that it has been applied fast. You do link to atoms because you ignore the canon of construction, that you ignore the voidness kind of construction by making certain words void in the resolution. Now the frame for the substantial cards that they write in the 1ER1 prefer the 1NC evidence because it's from a circuit court. It's the highest court in the land. Is the only one that's applied the test. It hasn't been challenged by the Supreme Court. They haven't done anything differently. So here to our interpretation because it is the most legal precise because it's the most legally precise. Second, interpretations have to mean something. That was all above. The first court of appeal evidence one only finds substantial, not substantially limiting. Our interpretation is closest to the topical wording, which should be forward. Second, it's older. We have an updated interpretation from the court of appeals. The modifier matters. There are four. It's there for a reason. Eve substantially is a bad modulator. It's the worst of all worlds to avoid it. That's the void. It's opposite above the common meaning. From the Virginia. It's from the Virginia Supreme Court. Should be rejected. Even if common meaning is good for debate, it's not good for the Supreme Court. Actually, does. It's not the most predictable because the Court of Appeals, the highest court in the land, who has ruled on this, should be the most predictable. The CETA interpretation just proves that substantially shouldn't have been interpreted. The topic major and broadest both linked to our under limiting interpretation. We do not overlimit. There is a ton of ground to be had from four different apps. The apps on an Elam Kim's extreme, we slightly overlimit. It is better to have a smaller topic than a larger topic because it encourages breadth over depth, which means to get net more. Changing we learn about the nuances of different alliance policies. Picks are not unbeatable. Picks are not unbeatable. The healthcare topic proves that even when everyone agreed that the apps had to change the entire U.S. healthcare system, no one went for picks in the first place because the extent that they exist, they are dumb and don't have solvency advocates. But if they do have solvency advocates, it's predictable in the literature. If they are right that solvency advocates do matter and people care about them, then only picks that are in the literature will be read, which is terminal defense to your over limiting offense. Picks are not. That means that picks are not unbeatable. You should be able to beat them anyway because they create a zone entrapment, which means that relying on overarching theories for alliance credibility is good in this case. Functional limits do not solve because tiny f's can always link turn them. I did that on the overview. Solvency advocates don't check because no one needs solvency advocates in the first place. Michigan hasn't read one near a case in politics is a terrible example. Finally, reasonability is the most judged intervention. It's the most arbitrariness, which we all agree is bad. The final cry around the 2 and C indicates that causes a worst outcome because it requires everyone to rely on their own subjective interpretations. Means that even if they are reasonable, you should reject it because we just have a clearer interpretation of what debate on topics look like, and they don't have a reason. The counter interpretation is good, so default to our interpretation.
Okay, is everybody good? Okay. Yeah. I take it we're all ready. The negative interpretation goes too far. It is analogous to cutting off your head for the sake of a limit's headache. Our counterinterpretation is the perfect middle ground that preserves equal access for both sides. Impact calculus should not be decided on terminal impacts. Neg ground outweighs aft ground is a silly way to look at debate because side bias arguments are ultimately based on your speaker position. You should instead care about our internal link to aft ground versus our internal link, their internal link to negative ground. Our internal link to aft ground is comparatively massive and unmitigated. Their counterinterpretation and functional limits arguments, however, sufficiently mitigate their negative ground arguments that you should air aft. We have a major point of offense is predictability. Our interpretation, their interpretation is not what anyone would expect when getting the word to getting the resolution would expect that to mean. It is in fact egregiously unpredictable. Arbitrary interps outweigh an internal link. You should filter standards by how well they shape research practices. We don't start by randomly cutting apps we think are good and then trying to fit them into the topic. We start by cutting T cards and then seeing what the boundaries of the topic are and deciding whether or not that fits in there. The search for a predictable interp is the whole point of T. It turns any limits arguments they have. If the goal was just to limit the topic, we would just debate healthcare again, but we can agree that that would not be fair for the affirmative because that would mean the neg would always win. They can always find an interp that says, hey, it would be better to make it smaller and smaller. But if you cannot say that you could look at the topic and reasonably assess, this is what I think these words mean, then that is not what you should do. We have three internal links to this predictability argument that were basically dropped. Ace of point, context. They have no argument about alliance commitments, no argument about international policy. Their cards are all from one North Dakota charitable solicitation case. Our evidence is from the plain meaning of the word substantial, which is the only reasonable way anyone can assess what the words in the topic mean. Piece of point, grammar. They have dropped the EEOC indictment that we read at the top of the flow, or that Tyler read in the 1AR, that says our evidence is not even defining the phrase in the resolution. It is defining substantial limit, which is grammatically distinct from substantially limiting. It internal link turns all of their standards because they are not legally precise. Seize the point. They are not. There is a difference. Limit does not mean eliminate. They cannot take these words out of context. Our current evidence is citing a court case that said Congress's limitations are distinctions from eliminations, which means you should not arbitrarily read into the implication of this card is that you should not read substantial limit as a term of art. There is no reason that is the case. Substantial modifies limit, but does not mean those two must be always joined together. Disappoint. Framers' intent also dropped. They only said CETA should have seen it. CETA the topic votes we got explicitly distinguished terminate from eliminate or terminate from limit, which implies that those two were intended to be different, and it would be totally unfair for the app to say after the fact that we think it should be this other thing. Now at the top they say that they are the only words in the top. Now their arguments, they say they are the only word in the topic that was entered above. They are not the only word. They are not defining the words in the topic, and you should not read it as a term of art. They say a ground. We are going to link. We have link turned their ground standard because our internal link to app ground is much bigger. One, solvency advocates, or the framing issue for deciding ground arguments is you have to give a vision of what the debate is. Their vision in Crossix was, oh, just impact turns everything. DDEV 2AC, pro-lift good 2AC. That's a ridiculous. It cannot sustain for the rest of this tournament, much less a year's worth of debate. We have multiple other internal links to this other than ground, which are picks. We stopped reading NATO withdrawal because our only answer to picks was pro-lift good, which is sort of the same argument above, but they do not have an argument for why that is much bigger because we have nothing else to say. The negative always has the A5 pick. They always have the functional limits that I will explain slightly below. So you should care more about the aft ground than neg ground. Also, predictability outweighs ground because we need to know what is in the topic in order to prepare. You can't just say, oh, it would be great if we had a good econ DA on this topic. Neg gets econ DA. That is unpredictable and means predictability outweighs ground. Now, they say side bias that was answered above because you should not decide based on terminal impacts but internal links. Now, 2EC2, our counter interpretation. We have two ways our counter interpretation mitigates their offense. One, they have no answer to the definition of the word limit. It means it must limit adversaries, provocations, and locations. So you can't just do insane stuff like limit out from the time if the Messiah returns because that's not an actual adversary, location, or provocation type. They're all listed in the tree. So there's a finite number of cases and it further dwindles the number of possible solvency advocates. So you can't cut a crackpot on the internet. Two, substantial considerable is a limit. It is a common meaning. And there are many qualitative measures you could use in this context. Do you have recent evidence? Do you have a scholar in the main? Is this something that is geopolitically significant? You know it when you see it, and you know the SCS is geopolitically significant, but perhaps the moon may not be. They say choose what is legally acceptable. That is one. one, that is a bad frame because we are not lawyers making decisions. We are in debate. You should care somewhat about the sensibility of their interpretation in this case too. They are not legally acceptable. Just because they're from a high court does not mean the court is making a relevant rendering of the words in the resolution, nor of the context of what we are discussing. It would be different in alliance commitments, which is all the A through D subpoints I explained above. They say dangling modifier. They did not define the word in the resolution, so this is a total non-starter. And even if it is, this assumes substantial must be, it assumes they are reading substantial limitation as a term of art. You should read those two separately. They say 2EC short. SL means super long, dumbass. They say their interpretation was new. This is not a new argument. This has been being read since GSU, and it has won like one debate, I think. They say their Virginia court is not fair. Just because they have a higher court does not mean the higher court is making a rendering on the relevant judgment. You should instead make a rendering on whether or not they are defining the words, and only our evidence defines the plain meaning. Only we have evidence that says how has it been defined in debate. Our evidence also says that more commonly courts take the broader view, so you should not take an artificially narrow view. Now, their defense to our ground standard, their healthcare example goes the opposite way. Healthcare was a topic with only solvency cards. Both sides agreed econ and disease were the only terminal impact, which is frankly the opposite of this topic where the neg just proliferates terminal impacts. The AF reads no solvency, and it's a ridiculous debate. They say the overarching theory good, smaller AFs can use theory, and it is better to use that because it makes that debate more nuanced, so they do not turn our ground arguments. Now, 2EC5 functional limit solves it, mitigates enough of their offense. One, solvency advocates. Substantial is not the only thing you should care about. You should also care, there's a reason that 3 teams broke Japan Cyber yesterday and 3 teams broke Japan Bloody Nose second semester. It is because there are very few solvency cards on this topic, demonstrated from the fact, which is empirically borne out and probably borne out by all of your team's research. Second, DA case defense. No 2N that is flowing the case and does not just extend 2NCT substantial or read the consult Colin Call counter plan would have an actual strategy. They could go for the A5 pick. There are many things the neg can do, which means it is not try or die for limits. The negative goes too far. You should not vote for this argument because it is totally unfair for the app, and what ends it is just wrong. It's unpredictable. Instead, we have sufficient defense to their limits argument, so it's not try or die for limits. You should vote after preserve AF ground.
Good debate.
The neg card doc will be sending as soon as it uploads.
Okay, everyone is here, right? Just confirming. I see everyone. Yeah, okay, cool. Congratulations, everybody. This was a really good debate. The decision is a 3-0 for Dartmouth. I can go. Ultimately, I ended up deciding that the neg's interp is actually a little bit more arbitrary than the AF's interpretation in both international and legal context. And I don't think I have enough from the neg on why arbitrariness on, saying, yes, arbitrariness is inevitable to some degree, even if it's arbitrary, limits should outweigh all of this bullshit. I don't think I get that enough from the negative. I think ultimately everyone agrees that arbitrariness is a bad thing. Precision of words is very important. Otherwise, we would not be debating over the best sources and the best kind of ways to package the definitions that are in the topic. So here's why I think neg is more arbitrary and why I don't necessarily think that the AF wins, that every AF becomes considerable writ large in a vague capacity to allow all of these minor modifications. One, I don't think the neg handles the Chiba evidence that the AF reads very well. I think that the AF is winning. The context of international policy and defense pacts is important. I think that evidence defines what is kind of topical based on attacked by adversaries specific location without provocation. I think the AF meets that part. And I think it needs a better answer because it's actually the only evidence that says defense pacts. And I end up kind of actually preferring that to some of the court stuff that is mentioned. The second thing, I thought the whole substantial limit versus substantially limiting debate was kind of a little got lost in the sauce for why any of it matters at the end. It wasn't, yeah, I mean, I did it. It was kind of funny because I was like, okay, well, does the AF have an SLing substantially limiting interpretation or a card that says that? And the F actually does. The EOC evidence is the only card that says substantially limiting. But more broadly, I think the EOC evidence says that that interpretation should be construed broadly and doesn't need to substantially limit more than one activity. Which means, like, even if I don't give them that evidence and even if I don't think that is important, it kind of puts doubt in my mind on why your interpretation for substantially limit is necessarily the best or the most predictable for the debate. And I don't think and also I just, that's fine. And also I just wanted to say on the kind of the Chiba evidence for noun versus verb argument that the neg is making, I don't think it ended up mattering as much, like I said, because of the defense pact specificity that the AV has, and the neg evidence also ends up being slightly imprecise because of the substantially limit versus substantially limiting stuff. And substantially limit is not even in the resolution, which in context just kind of makes me think that it could be a little bit more unpredictable. I think I have more thoughts on why I guess like that outweighs the NDT kind of role, but ultimately ended up concluding that I don't think that the neg does enough on why, for example, limits should outweigh all of that, which I thought that's where a lot of the debate could have been, some of the 2-1-R should have focused a little bit more. But that was kind of the major two reasons for my decision. I have more thoughts, but I'll let more people talk.
I voted pretty much the exact same way. I think predictability matters a lot because it shapes research practices and determines, what people think is topical and is important for fairness reasons. And it's, kind of bolstered by the negatives arguments. I think that I should judge the debate like I'm a court. So if I'm a court, I don't really care about all these debate impacts, and I'm searching for a construction of the resolution that is predictable and not arbitrary and makes sense. So I think the plain meaning argument is the clearest internal link to predictability, and the use of high court evidence that's recent, which is the kind of neg's framing argument, doesn't really matter if the court was only establishing that construction of the term for the purpose of a limited solicitation case in North Carolina. I think Prost is really good at saying the plain meaning is considerable. And in instances where there is a quantitative definition, it changes according to context, which lends credence to this kind of big theme that I don't really think you handle, which is just like we shouldn't care about what the court said about North Carolina's solicitation when we're thinking about alliances and foreign policy debates. So the Court of Appeals evidence is also good on this and dovetails really well with the CETA evidence because it says that statutory construction requires looking to intent, and the intent of the community was clearly to vote against a termination topic, which I think makes this particularly arbitrary of a topicality argument to enforce the NDT. Neg framing arguments about this. One is like all words have meaning. I think theirs does, even if it's not a very limiting meaning. Recency, don't think it matters, which I said earlier. Thereas from a court 2, the like both people are pretty close to topic words. I agree that, you know, that kind of like limiting versus limit kind of got lost. It didn't matter a lot. And then the last thing I guess to talk about is just the like impacts, like over limiting arguments. I found the solvency advocate arguments and the like, you know, it's bad to just rely on right-wing hacks from Cato and then have impact turns debates. The argument that that's bad I found to be very convincing. And kind of undermined the normally compelling breadth over depth spin. I definitely agree that the whole focus of this 2NR needs to become like arbitrariness, predictability doesn't matter, fuck you, limits outweigh everything, because that's like a compelling sell. But going for like, we're the most predictable with evidence about a North Carolina solicitation statute just didn't really make much sense for me. Other things that would help a lot, a case list of like types of AFs that people would read. 2NR is just like tiny conditions AFs will pop up. Not too scared of those because I think the prolif links to conditions are good. And because, you know, the affirmative is saying that those things don't really have solvency advocates, which, you know, maybe is backed up by a bunch of people breaking Japan Cyber or Japan Bloody Nose all at the same time, which makes me think that the neg still has a foot in the door. Lastly, I thought the example, like the comparisons to other topics didn't make a whole lot of sense in this context. Healthcare single pair was great because it was core of the literature and had in-depth debate about it, which they're saying isn't true of the withdrawal AFs. And executive power, the explosion of the NDT was terrible because there was no unifying neg generic whatsoever, except for like maybe the war powers DA, which, you know, was awful. And like, I think that the neg has enough in the door on this topic that they can reasonably prepare for slightly smaller AFs.
I agree with everything that's been said so far. I'll just weigh in with a few additional things. I thought the impact debating on both sides could have been a lot better. I thought the 2NR, you know, it starts with limits. It was very unclear to me what the impact to limits was that was distinct from anything else. You sort of say there are going to be a lot of small AFs. I don't know why that's bad necessarily. Dartmouth offers a number of reasons why you'd still be able to debate them. Solvency advocates, they all need to do things with the MDT, et cetera. I think, you know, limits needs to have a distinct impact. There has to be something about that. It makes it impossible to be neg. There are impacts about that, why the neg won't invest as much in research, something like that. It's less enjoyable. We need to get to that level of stuff there. Similarly, I'm also not certain why just like neg ground loss is bad either. There needs to be a lot more framing about like, what does the topic here look like that is bad? That's concerning. And similarly, AF, I think the 2AR, I was a little surprised you started out with here's our internal link to ground. I think that you probably want a distinct impact to AF ground, especially let's say later in the tournament, you are reading something really small. You need to have a reason why it is good for you to be able to innovate with small new stuff. Why is that important? I thought the 1AR set it up well with this Cato stuff. I think that's especially convincing when the interpretation is so, is so limiting. I think that's a way to do it. I think we need to actually learn about real debates that are happening in the topic. We've read an F that's essentially all from March about this major dispute in the context of like a major flashpoint. Like that kind of stuff I think can be helpful and get you there. But I think that's something to just keep in mind for the future. A few other things, I found the court framing stuff unconvincing. I mean, an appeals court decision matters for a single circuit and it matters for a statute. I didn't know why the resolution was a statute. I don't know why one court's decision matters in that context. That stuff just didn't really resonate for me. I agree with what everyone said about the contextual nature of the definitions. I think here particularly the give meaning to every word in the statute thing cuts decisively off, given their contextual definition of the word limit. And more broadly, I think kind of like as a perceptual thing, at least for me, I think T substantial is an argument that's exceptionally difficult to win in almost all instances. I think it's perceptually almost impossible to win it in this instance against an app that is itself so big with the topic country. And so I would keep that in mind if that is a core strategy. And then my final thing, and this is just like a just like a minor ethos thing. I thought Dartmouth, I thought you got like a little too riled by T substantial. It's like, this is what it is. Like, let's just like execute and get it done. But yeah, that's it.
One quick thing for Dartmouth, I think in the future, y'all should try to find definitions of other words in the resolution that solve some of their limit stuff. So like no conditions F because of some interp of limit or reduce or something like that would help a lot.
I have a few questions. First, do you think just like based off of block versus 1AR, do you think was the right choice to go for T? Because that was like a conversation we had.
I thought so. I think you were just too light on the case to make the DA outweigh. Especially when,
yeah.
I mean, maybe you could have gotten it done with like the DA has external impacts and, you know, playing some defense to just like the China war escalation stuff would like maybe get it done. But overall, I thought T was the right choice.
Yeah, I was a little worried about case outweighs the disad. I thought you were doing fine on the disad, but given case coverage, I thought it was going to be difficult for case outweighs. Yeah.
Based on the way I saw the block, it seemed inevitable you were going to go for T. That seemed to me to be the plan the entire time anyway, because I think in order to do the other stuff, you would have needed a lot more investment on the, you know, theoretical aspects of the 1AC.
Yeah, this was sort of our choice in the beginning, so that was correct, but we almost just broke the plan. Second question, do you think it would have been the right choice for the block to either just like sit down a little bit more to like, sorry. Do you think it would have been better if the block had engaged them more on the like causes foederis debate, like that's not a limiting term, and focus and maybe let them pivot it away a little bit from substantial to just like limits in the 4 areas, the causes foederis, like read counter definitions of that, that prove that they didn't mean either? Or I guess like what's the best way to handle it when they sort of like switch, say something else matters more, if that made sense. Or did the like block into an R just need to invest in like, we have a test case that's done by the set by the Court of Appeals, should be preferred even if they, and sit down more and just like, doesn't matter if it's not contextual.
Yeah, I think more doesn't matter if it's not contextual, and then just like a defense to arbitrariness and predictability. Just say like, it doesn't matter. This is a predictable interpretation because people have been reading it all year. And so if it's good for debate, that's what you should prioritize, and then just like go really hard on limits are important.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I just wanted to add for the whole kind of limits, I thought the 2NR should have just gone for only limits. And I think that debate could have been set up into 2NC a little bit. But the whole like NDT kind of argument, I think you just need to do a little bit more of just really scaring us of like, what is the world of the NDT look like if you do win kind of like limits explosion, regardless of arbitrariness, regardless of all of that. Because I understand that you tried to posit that as kind of like a judge instruction or a big impact of just like the NDT will suck. And I think you could benefit from doing more of just like, yeah, this world would suck even if I buy all of this. It's the last tournament. Why does that matter? Even if they win all of these things, why is this different instances? What type of apps could be read? What could happen in elims, blah, blah, blah.
Just to weigh in from my perspective. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, just from my perspective, I just think that T substantial in this type of situation is an uphill and losing battle. I think the place where T substantial is convincing is when it's like a really, really, really tiny app with no other clear T argument. I think that's at least when like I'm willing to, you know, really, really seriously consider it. I think in this situation, it's just so difficult.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Good luck, y'all.
Thank you.
Good luck, everyone. Good debate.